First off, welcome everyone to the 8th Annual Law and Society Symposium, The Law of Energy. My name is Hank Young, and I'm the Editor-in-Chief of the Charleston Law Review, the flagship journal at the Charleston School of Law. We are so glad that you would spend your Friday with us at the Charleston School of Law, so thank you. And I'll keep my remarks short so we can get our wonderful topics and panelists underway. This symposium is put on by a long-standing partnership between the Charleston Law Review and the Riley Institute at Furman. Clinton McGill, our symposium editor for the Charleston Law Review, has put in a tremendous effort to make this symposium happen, so thank you to him. Jill Fusen of the Riley Institute has also been invaluable in getting our symposium off the ground, so thank you. Clinton selected 3 issues in energy law for us to discuss today. First, offshore drilling. Second, solar energy. And third, nuclear energy. Each of these topics is endlessly fascinating, no matter your position on the subject, and each have tremendous implications for our future. And so no matter your politics, we hope you walk away with a little more understanding about these complicated issues and be challenged in your position. And so we hope you engage in some critical thought and analysis and the hallmark of any worthy education. Finally, thank you for our panelists and moderators who have taken the time from their busy schedules to join us today. We sincerely appreciate it. We hope you enjoy our program, and with that, I will turn it over to our next speaker, Dr. Donald Gordon, the Executive Director of the Riley Institute at Furman.
Good morning, everybody. Good morning. I don't know whether you know this or not, but this is the 8th year of this, actually a very remarkable series and a collaboration between the Charleston School of Law, particularly Law Review, and the Riley Institute at Furman. We have loved working with the Law Review kids. I call them kids because everybody's a kid to me now, and I have been at Furman for 40 plus years. But we especially have enjoyed working this year with Hank Young, and with Clinton McGill. Extremely talented, great organizational skills, extremely personal. And it takes all 3 things if you're going to be successful in carrying out events like this. Riley Institute is named for former governor and U.S. Secretary of Education, Governor of South Carolina, Dick Riley. We have offices in Greenville and Mount Pleasant. Staff located in Columbia along the I-95 corridor. Among the initiatives and services we provide are innovative programs in public education, programs that promote legislative cooperation and statesmanship, and God knows how much we need that examine how to respond to crucial issues with data-based information rather than with rhetoric, leadership programs important to an increasingly diverse South Carolina. This Law and Society series is unique and important for our state. In fact, we don't know of another program like this anywhere in the U.S. It focuses on real issues that challenge South Carolina, all of which have significant consequences for our future. In previous programs, we've looked at the law and religion, at social media, the First Amendment, crime and punishment. We focused on the American Constitution, the Constitution of the state of South Carolina, the role of government, and last year we honed in on a very interesting topic, sports and the law. We've heard from the late, great Steve Morrison about Abbeville versus South Carolina, a case that continues to have import in the state. It's really still unsettled. From the #1 TED Talk speaker in the U.S., Brian Stevenson, on equal justice, former Supreme Court Justice Sandra Day O'Connor. All in this series, we've learned from each one of them and from the incredibly interesting panels that the Law Review has put together. And later today, we're going to hear from our 2016 keynote speaker, Catherine Heigel, the most impressive DHEC director. Today, we move into one of the most interesting, compelling, and timely areas of legal import we have in this state. While we use law and energy as the title for today's focus, that does not really get at the importance or the real-world specifics of what we're exploring, or actually the imperative nature of it for the state. Each of these topics and the associated legal actions and ramifications are among the most important of our time in the state, and I look forward to it. Now, before I ask my good friend Andy Abrams to the stage, I want to call your attention to the national event which the Charleston School of Law is the presenting sponsor, taking place April 15th through 17th at Furman. This is the national finals of the undergraduate mock trial tournament. It's the national finals of the national mock trial series. It's the best 48 teams out of 650 colleges and university teams that started in the year. We have to evaluate 96 trials here, and there's a flyer for those of you who we would love to be judges sitting on the desk back there when you leave. If you haven't signed up yet, please do so. And now I have the privilege of asking my good friend and former student Andy Abrams to the podium to start today. Folks, Andy Abrams.
Don was just 15 when he taught me at Furman. You know, the great things about doing the welcome and being the third one up is basically you can stand up here and just say ditto. Toss out all those remarks. Well, good morning, and on behalf of the Charleston School of Law, I would like to welcome you to what you've already been told, and that is that this is the 8th Annual Law and Society Symposium, which is jointly sponsored by the Charleston School of Law and the Riley Institute at Furman University. As you've heard over the past 7 symposia, we have truly explored a wide array of provocative topics, ranging from South Carolina's educational corridor of shame, as Don was referring to about the action involving the late Stephen Morrison, to the case against the death penalty and crime and punishment or unequal meeting of justice. This year's topic, the law of energy, should likewise prove to be timely and thought-provoking. You know, the President of the United States previously made the following observation. Here is your country. Cherish these natural wonders. Cherish the natural resources. Cherish the history and romance as a sacred heritage for your children and your children's children. Do not let selfish men or greedy interests skin your country of its beauty, its riches, or its romance. Well, the U.S. President wasn't Barack Obama, however, but instead was Teddy Roosevelt, who offered that passionate plea over 100 years ago. And as a counterpoint, we have the business perspective succinctly articulated around the same time by banker financier J.P. Morgan, who stated, "We are not in business for our health." So when it comes to the use or misuse of our resources, when it comes to the law of energy, an inherent tension exists on the issue, and passions on all sides have seemingly always run high. With panel discussions on topics such as offshore drilling and nuclear waste disposal, I fully expect that today's symposium, like its predecessors, will be provocative, passionate, and at times controversial. But of course, that's the very point of our Law and Society Symposium. It's the very point of the Riley Institute. It's the very reason why Don and I, 8 years ago, said, you know, this state, this nation needs these kinds of discussions. So again, on behalf of the Charleston School of Law, on behalf of my alma mater, Furman University, and my good friend Don Gordon, welcome and enjoy the program.
Ditto. Thank you, Dean Abrams, Don Gordon, Mr. Young, for your gracious introductions. Our charge today is simple on its face, but really it's complex at its core. Our My charge today is to tell you why the Charleston School of Law chose the law of energy as our 8th annual Law and Society Symposium. Now, after much debate, I really thought about this, and I think that the way to really set this off is to give you kind of a chronology of events, significant events in energy law and society that have paved its way to today. On March 31st, 2010, President Barack Obama announced his intention to open the Mid-Atlantic and South Atlantic planning areas to oil and gas exploration. Shortly thereafter, on April 20th, 2010, an explosion and sinking of the Deepwater Horizon oil rig in the Gulf of Mexico occurred. For the next 87 days, 3.19 million barrels of oil leaked into the Gulf, making it the largest accidental oil spill in history. As a result, on December 1st, 2010, Interior Secretary Ken Salazar announced a ban on drilling in federal waters off the coast in 2007. 1 year later, December 7th, 2011, Ban Ki-moon, Secretary General of the UN, really tied in how energy is woven into all these other global issues. He spoke at the 17th Conference of the Parties in Durban, South Africa. Climate change, demographics, water, food, energy, global health, women's empowerment. These issues are all intertwined. We cannot look at one strand in isolation. Instead, we must examine how these strands are woven together. We must create a fabric that will support not just 7, but 9 billion and more people sharing one planet in a more equitable and sustainable manner. 1 person in 5 lacks access to modern energy. 3 billion people rely on charcoal or wood for cooking and heating. They are energy poor, and energy poverty holds back economic growth and job creation. The answer is to provide affordable energy for all. March 31st, 2012, the Nuclear Regulatory Commission approved 2 new Westinghouse reactors to be built at the FVC Summer Nuclear Station outside of Columbia. June 2nd, 2014, after passing through the South Carolina House and Senate without a single vote against it, Governor Nikki Haley signed into law South Carolina Act 236, also known as the Distributed Energy Resource Program Act. The act effectively brought the state out of the Stone Age, if you will, and into the solar light. These issues will all be covered today and more. I can't delve into them too much because I'm not an expert, but what I hope you take from today is that energy law, the law of energy, this symposium is not meant to just focus on one narrow issue in the legal community. These issues affect all of us. And although they're happening without us even knowing, they're happening. I'd like to welcome you all to the law of energy. Thank you. We could have our first panel up here. Our first panelist is Mr. Skeet Hansman. He's a partner in the Lafayette offices of Jones Walker. His practice focuses on the area of maritime, energy, oil and gas, aviation, and products liability. He's authored papers on the immediate handling and response to mass casualty incidents, such as the BP incident. Chris DeSher is a managing attorney in the Charleston office of the Southern Environmental Law Center, where he leads the nonprofit organization's Coast and Wetlands program, and also focuses on offshore drilling in the Atlantic, saving southern wetlands, and reform transportation in South Carolina. Stephen Goldfinch serves in the South Carolina House of Representatives for District 108. He's held positions for the past 3 years and has served on the Agriculture, Natural Resources, and Environmental Affairs Committee. Jack Smith is our moderator today. Jack is a partner at Nelson Mullins, and he will be corralling these fellows over here, and we are looking forward to it. Thank you.
Thank you very much. If someone has trouble hearing, please do let us know. I tend to stand up and walk a little bit. Hopefully the mic will still pick me up. We appreciate everybody being here today and want some questions after our discussion. So please jot them down or raise your hand at that time and we'll get to it. My goal will be to try to present some questions and ask the panelists to discuss some of the issues that we all face. Looking at what offshore development means, it creates a question of, well, who's in control? If you look at the state territorial limit, the 12-mile, the 3-mile nautical mile limit, the 200-mile exclusive economic zone, look at the federal government, the state government, and the interplay of the statutes we already have, from the Submerged Lands Act to the Coastal Zone Management Act to a variety of other things that will apply to it. It's hard to know exactly who's in charge and how those decisions are going to be made. But there is already a process in place, announcements being made that we're going to open up an area for exploration and potential leasing. Immediately, we started looking at programmatic environmental impact statements for things happening in the OCS, including for wind energy as well as for oil and gas. So there are a variety of things that are happening that hopefully today we might be able to get a snapshot of where some of those things are and what those processes look like in terms of public participation. Because along the coast, all of us are stakeholders. And what's unique about coastal resources and offshore resources is that the stakeholders are not just those people that live along the coast, but people in Greenville come to the beach, people in Columbia eat shrimp, people in Florence drive cars, everybody turns on the lights. So there's an interplay of stakeholders for coastal issues that really exceeds most others. It's a broader base of stakeholders, which means the debate can often be much more lively. I expect that's part of what we'll see today. I certainly appreciate everyone being here today to help with this discussion. And if I don't ask all the questions you want me to, please let's ask them on ourselves as well. This is a more informal discussion and hopefully educational. So who should have the role in making the decisions about whether exploration of oil and gas resources off of the South Atlantic should occur? Who has that authority and who should have it? Chris?
Sure, I'll take a stab at that. Well, we're in the middle right now of the 5-year planning process. So the Obama administration and the federal agency BOEM, which is within the Department of the Interior, they are now managing this process of developing a new 5-year plan for oil and gas exploration. That process was kicked off last January. There was an opportunity for scoping comments, and just a lot of public input into the process. And right now we're expecting probably in March the draft 5-year plan, which is issued under the Outer Continental Shelf Lands Act, OXLA. There will be a 45-day comment period on the draft plan, and for folks that don't know this, the current proposal is the waters off Virginia, North Carolina, South Carolina, and Georgia are proposed for being opened up for oil and gas drilling. Now, there's never been any production, never been any offshore oil production in the Atlantic to date, so this is a new frontier, and it's a crucial step and process that's underway right now. So once the 5-year plan comes out, the draft plan, there will be a 45-day comment period under OXLA. There will also be a draft environmental impact statement prepared under and disclosed under the under NEPA, National Environmental Policy Act. And there will be there's a 90-day comment period under OXLA and a 45-day comment period under NEPA, which seems a little bit strange, and hopefully those comment periods will be more consistent. But it's a critical time because it's the last chance for the public to weigh in on whether or not states like South Carolina are part of this plan or not. Once there is a final plan, that is issued. Congress gets to weigh in for 60 days, but there is no public comment. So right now, the next couple months is really the critical time period for folks to weigh in on the federal process.
And I ask you that question first, Chris, because as a Southern Environmental Law Center representing environmental interests, I'm sure you're focused in on what those public participation opportunities are. I guess, Steve, if you don't mind me calling that, from your lens and perspective of experience you've seen in the Gulf, pre and post deep horizon, do you see that process working? Are there public participation opportunities? What is it really like to go through this leasing program that we've never seen before in the South Atlantic?
Well, short answer, it's already been done. So there hasn't been an attempt per se or public rule suggested on the state level that would affect that part of the Gulf of Mexico. So there's not been a time to comment. As from the federal level, there has been for all the advances in the industry, as well as whether it's for companies or criminal. They passed several criminal laws out to make people personally liable, and that is very important for what goes on when you're drilling, because almost 99% of all spills are related to drilling.
All right, well, I see from a legislative perspective, looking at South Carolina, where does the legislature have a role to play in the process we're looking at?
Well, I think that the federal government, at least BOEM, believes that the state legislature and the governor has, I think they call it a role of deference, is sort of the term of art that's used. So the answer to your question is the federal government, of course, has jurisdiction. They have authority over federal waters. But barring any sort of strong opinion by the administration, in other words, if Obama's administration says, I have no opinion of this, I think BOEM comes along and says, Governor Heigel or whoever our next governor is, or the state legislature, what do you believe about this? How do you feel about this? What do you want us to do? The truth of the matter is, and I think we all have to admit the truth here if we're going to understand this fully, the truth of the matter is the administration, the current administration has a strong belief one side or another. BOM is going to do what the current administration wants to do, regardless of what the state or any municipality, for that matter, wants the federal government to do.
Can I just weigh in on that?
This is a bit session, so yes.
Under OXLA, this federal statute, the Obama administration is looking to the governors in our region to say, speak for the states, to say, do these states want in or not? Do they want to have drilling off their shores or not? And the governors of all of the states in play, Virginia, North Carolina, South Carolina, Georgia, have all been in favor of opening up our waters. And, it's interesting because I think that the governors in this region, I think other folks expected that people and communities in this region would want drilling. And what's happened has been pretty remarkable. We now have more than 100 communities up and down the Atlantic that have issued resolutions opposing both seismic testing and drilling. In South Carolina, virtually every coastal community has issued a resolution opposing drilling and seismic testing. Charleston, Myrtle Beach, Georgetown, Seabrook, Kiowa, Isle of Palm, Sullivan's Island, and also, a bipartisan group of politicians, Representative Sanford, Jim Clyburn, Lieutenant Governor Henry McMaster's expressed cynicism about drilling, State Senator Chip Campson. So the point is that under OXLA, they are looking to our representatives, and there's been sort of an avalanche of opposition, which I don't think was expected, but it has occurred. And so my hope is that the Obama administration will listen to what these communities along the coast of South Carolina and other states have said.
If I can just add something, because I agree that it's going to come down to the administration. matter how anyone really looks at it. The best example of that is the Keystone pipeline that everyone knows about. A show of hands, how many people know that there were already 2.5 phases done of Keystone before Nebraska objected to phase 3 and 4? Did anyone know that? Okay, some people did. Most of the public does not know that. And it wasn't until Nebraska, the railroads, and other interests got involved that the administration got involved. And that is a very good example of how the administration can dictate the policy. And that is why TransCanada will wait, and if the Republican elected in 2016, then they'll come in and they'll get it passed, and the railroads will lose out, and it will be built. But a lot of people don't realize there's already 3 phases. So yes, it comes down to the administration. They will tell the departments what to do.
And I guess just my understanding is that the Obama administration wants to complete the 5-year plan process before he leaves office, so that
Part of his legacy.
right. And you know, the interesting thing is recently there was an announcement in D.C. that the Obama administration was not going to allow any more coal leases, new coal leases on federal lands. And you know, this is a really analogous situation. You know, why allow a new frontier to be opened up for oil and gas? You know, at this point in time when we're dealing with climate change and greenhouse gas emissions, and so you would think, just reading the tea leaves, that this is not the legacy that the Obama administration would want to leave. And even in his State of the Union speech, you know, he mentioned that he is really pushing so that his initiatives reflect the true cost of these energy decisions.
I'm sure we're all shocked that there's any inconsistency coming from anybody in the federal or government, but be that as it may. Let's enjoy the music. The role of government, who's in control. I don't know that we know the answer to that question. I think as the process continues and individuals get, I know one interest group that's going to be a winner, and that's the lawyers. Because I think that we're going to see litigation over this at every level that it may be possible.
There's already been some litigation over this because South Carolina, DHEC has issued their coastal zone consistency determinations for seismic testing, and a number of conservation groups, but also a number of cities in South Carolina have challenged those determinations, which are pending before the administrative law court.
Exactly. And it'll get in other federal suits under other federal statutes. And you've yet to see the tip of the iceberg of what's happening because the process is very early. You're just looking at exploration, much less seismic exploration, much less when you're drilling. So we know that is going to heat up.
Of course, if the Obama administration removes South Carolina and the rest of the Atlantic, there may be no litigation.
Well, that's true. I'm sure the students in law school would be disappointed. Damping of their future potential. Looking at who's in control and all, what are we seeking control of? Let's think about the dynamic, interactive environment within which OCS energy development could occur, wind energy or oil and gas. If nothing happens on the OCS, it ain't going to affect something on shore. Either because of support development, people have to get, we don't swim out to platforms, we don't swim out and drag things by, aqualine. We have ships that have to get back and forth. We have ports they have to go to. They have to be filled up. They have to do equipment and supplies. There's a lot of economic activity involved, a lot of potential impact. Where should that be sited? And what kind of effects would we see if there was development and there was a spill? From what I've seen, it looks like all the interest is very far offshore, maybe 100 miles offshore. Nothing really very close, nothing visible. The only time it would be visible if the boats come and go, a pipeline gets put in, a refinery gets built, or other types of onshore support activities would occur. There seems to be a disjoint between what happens on the land, because that's really controlled by the local governments with their zoning, by the state government through the coastal zone consistency and permitting directly, Corps of Engineers permitting for wetlands. still onshore, even overlay who's in control, but is there going to be an OCS development land side plan if, in fact, somebody wins the lawsuits, gets the lease, and produces barrels of oil or PDP or gas offshore? Are we going to go to Wilmington? Are we going to go to Savannah? Which are litigious for them? Or will we plan it and have something here? Behind all that is the balance. What is the economic and environmental balance that hasn't been, can it be achieved? From a financial standpoint, Stephen, I'd ask you, is the legislature prepared? Have we got what we need in place in case it does happen to get the financial resources that should be in place to help support managing and preparing for and protecting against the potential harm that could come and reap the benefits from OCS development?
So if the question is, are we prepared for it, the answer is no. That's very clear. There's no South Carolina treaties on offshore oil and gas development. It's never been done before. Of course, I'm sure that there are some people that are in the process of writing those right now. We've had a number of committee meetings, subcommittee meetings, and informal meetings regarding the future of energy development and offshore energy development. So, are we thinking about that? Yes, we're certainly thinking about it. Has it been done? Has it been developed? No. Now I'll jump to the beginning. The impetus of this question was, is South Carolina suitable? I think is where we were going. Where's the sites going to be for development if we were to have an East Coast port of operations? And from what I can tell from talking to both sides, industry leaders and conservationists seem to be both focused. Energy leaders focused on the development of Georgetown, and conservationists focused on the opposition to Georgetown. So Georgetown seems to be sort of the target for this offshore development, for a site for offshore development. And if you're familiar with Port Fourchon down in Louisiana, made a number of visits down there, that's sort of the main hub for offshore development down in Louisiana. I'm sure she's familiar with Fourchon. Fourchon is a much, much, much larger place than Georgetown is, which leads to the question of whether or not Georgetown can support such operations offshore. And you have to go back to the beginnings of Fourchon to understand whether or not that's possible. Fourchon actually started, I think, approximately 9 acres, and they reclaimed land and reclaimed land and reclaimed land, and now it's thousands and thousands and thousands of acres. It's actually quite an impressive site if you go down there and visit it yourself, as far as the number of trucks and helicopters and operations and employees and, I mean, you name it, from ice to food to fuel to whatever. I mean, you name it, it's happening at Fourchon. So is Georgetown a viable option for that? I don't know. I think it probably could be. Georgetown is not the tourism hub that Myrtle Beach or Wilmington is, and certainly not Charleston is. Georgetown wouldn't have the opposition that you're probably all familiar with the ship debacle in Charleston and all of the opposition to having cruise ships in Charleston. And whether or not Charleston would want to take a stab at any kind of offshore development, probably not. They're probably not even ready to begin the thought process, much less to get into the process of how we're going to do it. So Georgetown seems to be the option for South Carolina if it is South Carolina. And whether or not we are going to have onshore sites, refineries, that doesn't sound to me, and it hasn't come to me in any kind of organizational information, any kind of industry information that is anywhere in the works. So, I think it's well. That's the thing. It's whether or not we have gas, whether or not we have oil. We don't know. So we haven't done any seismic. We don't know what's there. It's kind of like, do you have $2 buried in your backyard or $1 billion buried in your backyard? Do you really want to go find out? And I think the answer to that question is yes. We want to find out what's there so that we can make an informed decision. But we can't take that next step until we know what's there to determine whether or not we should be moving forward or not.
Ask you what the value has been, what the economic impact of actual onshore support activities have been.
Well, Jack, that is a loaded question because it's hard to measure exactly how much Louisiana, as well as the United States, have benefited from offshore drilling. As everyone probably knows, 16% of our oil in the United States comes from offshore, whether it's Louisiana, Alabama, Florida, or California. So that is not a big number, obviously. However, to the extent that it helps the economy, it's immeasurable. The oil field is the one job that a blue-collar worker with a high school degree can make 6 figures. It is a very unique industry. There are several people that will break out, that they invent different apparatuses to make things safer or more efficient. And then they become overnight millionaires. I know many of them, okay? And when that starts happening, when you start having people that have jobs, are making very good money, it's hard work, okay? It's not the best type of work in terms of, you have to know what you're doing, you have to pay attention, because it's dangerous. No more dangerous than working on the railroads, though. Congress determined that years ago. The economy as a whole, and this is why it's a loaded question, is, and I can see this now with the downturn, because every time there's a downturn, you can read about it in the Wall Street Journal, how badly it's affecting Louisiana, Texas, and North Dakota, for example. It's really, really bad. That's when you see what good it does when it's back in a normal, which it will be, $60 to $80 a barrel. And it's all cyclical. You can go back and watch this happen in the 80s, it happened in the 60s. It will bounce back because there's way too many interests involved, whether it's in the United States or overseas. Tomorrow, for instance, Saudi Arabia launched something against Iran. Saudi Arabia would need money, and they would go ahead and jack it up. Something as easy as that. The stuff that Putin's doing, a lot of people in the industry believe that is on purpose because that is where he and his friends are losing money. That was their #1 export. So in terms of how it affects the economy, it brings in all sorts of jobs. It brings in jobs for people that not necessarily would have a job that could pay them that much, because those jobs are primarily overseas now. And when you really see it when there's a downturn, because if people aren't making money, then you see homes aren't being built. That then, people who build the homes aren't making money. The restaurants are empty. People sell, merchants, whatever type of retail. So there's a huge economic impact. And I've read several numbers last night. It's hard to pin down the exact one, but it's in the billions each year for a state like Louisiana, as well as California. There's a lot of interesting stuff. And that's one thing that you guys should look at. If you want to know a lot about the facts, go to, don't read about Louisiana. Louisiana's beaches are ugly and always have been ugly. But Florida, for instance, I love going to Florida. I go to Seaside, Florida every year. I'm going to retire there one day. And they have offshore drilling, and it's 100 miles away. And I assume everyone gets an idea of how far 100 miles is and how you don't see it. It's not something that is right there, and it has not affected their tourism. Even Horizon, as horrible as it was, didn't affect Florida's tourism. Off of the coast of Santa Barbara, they've had some incidents before. That hasn't affected their economy. I can give you some quotes from the LA Times in which they've interviewed people over there who say, look, this has been going on, the worst was in 1969, and we bounced back very quickly. One thing that helps with that, this last thing I'll add, is what you mentioned earlier, is lawyers. And what lawyers have done is they keep everyone in line. You know, the plaintiffs bar, I'm sure they are in South Carolina, is very powerful, as they are in Louisiana. And it's a very good system of keeping, you know, checks and balances to where they come in, they will sue everyone. They'll get the government involved, and eventually everyone's going to be made whole unless they get greedy, as in the BP case, wherein they had to change the process because so many people from Louisiana to Florida to even outside of Louisiana, well, outside the coast, were filing claims that were not supported by their taxes. And if it wasn't supported by their taxes, then they're essentially cheating, because you cannot claim lost profits if you didn't throw it to the government. So it's kind of a long answer, but that is.
Your perspective is unique. I mean, we have no experience, and you've been through, you know, the large.
Jeff, let me just add one thing. And this is, I personally think it's very admirable that you guys, you know, want to protect your beaches. Everyone does, okay? I like the fact that people are watching out for the environment. It makes complete sense. By the same token, though, you need to realize that oil companies are not in the business to kill. They're not in the business to hurt animals. They care for their employees more than we state. They're not going to risk someone's life. You know, the idea of the big bad company that doesn't care, it's few and far between. Unfortunately, when it happens, it's something like BP, which there was human mistake, and arguably, you know, some people made decisions that were really terrible. I can't talk about that too much because we're representing some of the people on the white collar aspect, but those incidents are very, very rare.
Jack,
Can I jump in?
cut you off earlier. If you guys want to give you a chance to speak.
Oh, me first?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, there's a lot to respond to there. You know, just yeah, it is. A few thoughts. You know, in terms of Georgetown being targeted, you know, my understanding is that Georgetown has passed a resolution saying that they don't want this. The mayor of Georgetown has, I think, written a memo saying that he doesn't think it's the right fit for Georgetown. Florida historically has been very opposed to offshore drilling. And then, you know, so we talk about, you know, the economic impacts. I think one huge difference between here and the Gulf is that the Gulf has kind of grown up with this industry, and here we have a completely different situation. You know,
Our new money, right?
What's that?
Usually be new money, right?
No, it means it threatens everything we have, in my view. I mean, you know, the worst case scenario if we have drilling here is we get a BP-like spill, and I don't think these companies are bad people, or I don't think they want people harmed on their rigs, but the reality is that mistakes happen, and so a BP-like spill, you know, somewhere off North Carolina or South Carolina would be devastating. And I don't think anyone would argue with that point. And then, you know, the best case scenario is that you have no BP spill, but you have the pipelines, the refineries, you know, all the infrastructure. You know, where is that going to go? Is it all going to go in Georgetown? Is it, you know, going to put in Shem Creek somewhere? I mean, where is the oil refinery going to go?
What if it's just gas?
I don't think that's realistic. I don't think there's any chance that we open up. I mean, people talk about that, but if this area is open for oil and gas, I don't think it's realistic to think that it's somehow going to be limited just to gas. But there's also a ton of infrastructure associated with gas. But then, you know, I mean, I think the economic question is very important to look at because there's basically one industry report that's been put out there by the Quest Consulting Group, and it was funded by API, and it touts these huge economic numbers for this region, and all the jobs and all the revenues that would flow into this part of the country. But if you look at that, I guess there's two things I'd like to say about that report. Number one, it's filled with faulty assumptions to prop up the jobs numbers and the revenues. And just a couple of examples of that, the Quest report projects something like $19 billion, you know, by 2035 could come to these states, like South Carolina. Under federal law right now, $0 would come to these states because there is no revenue sharing with the states. The federal government would get all of the leasing revenues as it stands today under federal law. And my sense is that that is very unlikely to change in Congress. So these promises of revenue sharing coming to states like South Carolina, I think is very, very dubious, number one. And number two, the Quest report has all sorts of assumptions about, for example, they assume that the entire Atlantic, their numbers are based on the entire Atlantic from Maine to Florida being open to oil and gas drilling. And the reality is, we're only talking about 4 states, and we're talking about a 50-mile buffer along the coast. So there are a slew of examples that really undercut all these jobs numbers and revenues from oil and gas leasing. And then the other thing is the Quest report doesn't talk at all about what we already have. And so the ocean-based economy, we had some economists look at this, and the ocean-based economy in our 4 states in 2012 produced nearly $15 billion in economic revenue. I mean, that's the hotels, the restaurants, it's recreation, beaches, all of that. I mean, it's why people come to this part of the world, and all of that is jeopardized.
Sure, that's part of the balance that one would have to look at in making decisions, but where's the countervailing report to the Quest report?
I have a copy right here.
Is it published?
Yeah, I'm happy to email it to anybody in this room. It's produced by...
Because I think one of the things before, let's even get back to the financial side of things, and the state's interest would be, where do we find the truth? Everybody is coming out on one side or the other. It's a very divisive type of take sides issue.
Jack, you can come to me for the truth. I will give you the truth. Well, you can rest assured. And you can read our report.
I think the Petroleum Institute will give me the truth. I think the EM will give me the truth. I think DEC will give me the truth. Right, but how do I tell which truth is the truth? So I think it's difficult to get the massive amount of information that has to be looked at and evaluated to make balanced decisions with in one place and assimilate it and vet it. And as we heard, who makes that decision? If it's really administration and Georgetown says no, they may not get to really say no. So it's difficult to know how that's going to work out. But on the money side, Stephen, you think there's really no chance we'll ever get cost share if we were to seek development?
Quite frankly, I think it's a ludicrous argument. First of all, I don't know that it's ever been done, that it's ever not been done. And I can promise you that if we were moving forward with oil and gas development, that South Carolina would do everything in its power to stop it if there wasn't profit sharing in place. It would be opposed by every single politician in South Carolina if there wasn't.
Lawyers, right?
Including the lawyers. So the argument that we shouldn't go forward because there's no profit sharing comes with a little sting of hypocrisy, because on one hand, the people that are in D.C. and Columbia arguing against profit sharing right now are the same people, that would be the environmentalists, that are saying that profit sharing is what's standing in the way, that having no profit sharing is standing in the way. Obviously, they don't want profit sharing, because if profit sharing becomes true, then oil and gas has an even better chance of coming to South Carolina. So, we go round and round, and you make a very good point. You have a hard time discerning what the truth is here. The oil and gas industry will tell you one thing. The oil and gas industry will tell you there's gazillions of dollars in potential profit. Everybody's going to be completely rich. There's going to be no risk. There's going to be no downside, and that's not true. Okay? Now, on the other side, the environmentalists will tell you the world's going to blow up. Everything's going to hell in a handbasket. There's absolutely no profit sharing. You have to think for yourselves here. Okay, if you start believing that this multi-billion-dollar industry is not going to have any economic impact on South Carolina, then you and I need to have a talk. Okay, I mean, we seriously need to have a talk. Please don't believe that. This is my alma mater. Okay, so if you're here from the Charleston School of Law, don't do that to me. That's the kind of an argument
that only a USC law grad would believe. Now, let me address a couple of points here. Okay, so Georgetown mayor has opposed offshore oil and gas. Do you think the federal government cares what the Georgetown mayor has to say? The answer to that question is no, absolutely not. Absolutely not. What does that have to do with anything? Nothing. Absolutely nothing. So, anyway, the blue economy report, which is what the environmentalists use to contradict the, API's report, I assume is what we're talking about here, takes into account absolutely no profit sharing. That's why they say there's no economic benefit to South Carolina. You can't believe that. That is way over here on one side, okay? Keep in mind, you also can't believe that everybody's going to be rich. I think I've made that point clear. I think I've beat that horse to death. But please think for yourself in this matter. There is some truth somewhere in the middle. Now, I do want to say that I want to jump over on something that Skeet said a little while ago. I have a friend actually that, as far as the impact, personal impact, economic impact, I have a friend that is a mental rights lawyer in Colorado right now. And as you know, Colorado has been booming over the last few years, and it's dwindled a little bit as gas prices have come down, but it certainly will come back. But booming with fracking. I mean, it's just been absolutely booming. Now, this friend and I don't share all the same political beliefs, and he absolutely despises oil and gas companies, but he does mineral rights law, okay? And he makes a gazillion dollars a year off of it every single year. So he loves their money, but he hates their politics, right? His son, who is a blue-collar guy, never went to college, nothing wrong with that, makes $1,250 a day in the oil fields. He's 27 years old. $1,250 a day. There's not a lot of lawyers that make I'm trying to think of a lawyer I know right now in South Carolina that makes $1,250 a day. Maybe some of you extraordinarily smart tax lawyers do. $1,250 a day for a guy that never went to college. He sits behind a computer screen and plays a video game, sort of. He does this with a joystick, doing directional drilling. If that doesn't have an economic impact, I don't know what does. We cannot fall into this belief, this disingenuous sort of argument that this multi-billion-dollar industry will not have an impact. Does it have risks? Yes, it does. That's what we have to accept on the other side. It has risks. Are the risks worth the rewards is what we have to now come to a conclusion on. I've said this multiple times. I see Mr. Hamilton is over there from Coastal Conservation League, and I'm sure he's recording what I'm saying because it's come out before, and I'll say it again. We have to balance the risks with the rewards in South Carolina. You drove your car here today. It's one of the most dangerous things you do in your entire life is drive your car. But you decided the CLE credit was worth coming here today to listen to us who are probably boring you to death. Okay? But you decided it was worth the reward to come here. The risk was worth that reward. That's exactly what South Carolina has to do. We have to find what that middle truth is, somewhere between the environmentalists and the oil companies. We have to find what that truth is, what that impact is in South Carolina. And we have to determine whether the risk is worth the reward. Now, what's the risk? What's the risk? The risk is a spill. But like Mr. Skeets said, could I call you Mr. Skeets? I like that.
I call a lot of things, that's fine.
Like Skeets said, Louisiana right now is doing great. Ecotourism is booming. Quite frankly, I go there every single year to yellowfin tuna fish around the rigs. I fish right off the rigs. If you want to see pictures, I'll show you of me underneath an oil rig catching a giant yellowfin tuna. I scuba dive down there every single year underneath the rig, spearfishing. I used to be a commercial spearfisherman. Still go down there and do that. I fish in the marshes. The marshes are fantastic. They're booming. There's wildlife everywhere. The best red fishing in the country is in Louisiana. So is it this barren waste ground that some people would lead you to believe? No. No, it's not. Is it a problem if there's an oil spill? Yes. And it needs to be cleaned up immediately. That's the risk. But Louisiana's bounced back. California has bounced back numerous times. Alaska's bounced back. Alaska is one of the most rich wildlife in the entire world. So let's find that middle ground, and let's figure out what the truth is so that we can truly evaluate what the reward is.
Before we get into a debate, let Chris answer that. Steve, what about the risk management? Have we learned anything from Deep Horizon? Is the industry better? Is there less risk today than it was before that accident?
Yes, absolutely.
Why?
And, well, obviously, the administration put in place several new regulations, which everyone agrees. The industry agreed with it. One had to do with the blowout preventers. Others had to do with inspections and maintenance. You had the criminal statutes as well as the ability of the Coast Guard to really, truly get involved, because before Horizon, the Coast Guard, they're very, very good people, and I've worked with them on many occasions, but they're really understaffed. And it's very challenging for them to deal with something like this, because they're the first responders before you get to, hiring or bringing someone in to do the containment. The Coast Guard has been given more money, they've been given more allocated funds to bring in people to help with this, to conduct inspections, because that's another problem is if you don't have routine inspections, you might run into a problem. But, and this is an important point that, and I'm not trying to get off your question, this is something that needs to be brought out with respect to the whole issue that you're talking about. Look, I agree, change, as mentioned a while ago, it is scary for everyone in every aspect of life, okay? You don't know the unknown, so you're really happy with what you have and you don't want to risk it. The truth is, however, the number one risk for an oil spill is already occurring every day in your state. There are tankers that carry petrochemicals all up and down the coast, all up and down the Atlantic. That is the number one source of spills, not rigs. The government will say that. You can read, I have a study here from the National Academy of Sciences where they just flat out say the number one risk is not oil rigs, it is tankers. And tankers have problems because they run into things, or unfortunately the captain might be a little tired. And so that's something to consider, is that you already have this risk. The risk of an oil rig actually spilling and having a blowout of this proportion is extremely low. It's comparable to flying. People fly every day, countless times. And you only hear about it when someone crashes, okay? The industry as a whole, and this is a stat that the government has put out, the administration's put out, of the billions of dollars of oil transported in U.S. waters. And it's important also to recognize that we're talking about U.S. waters. And I don't mean to burst any bubbles, so please don't take offense. But Congress has long mandated that after 3 miles, the states don't have any say in it. That's why what a county might say, it doesn't matter. Steve was right. If it's 50 miles out or 100 miles out, it's technically international waters. It's within 3 miles, that's very different. And you can read the Continental Lands Act to find that. But getting back to the quote, and this is from the administration, from the Department of the Interior, of the billions transported, okay, and that's all types, tankers, oil, pipelines, and I do a lot of work for pipelines. They are extremely safe, and usually what happens if something goes wrong is because someone made a mistake, human. Only 0.001% is spilled. Okay, you have a better chance of getting hit by lightning. It is not something that is a common occurrence. When people say or write that it's frequent, that is just wrong. That would be like me saying, hey guys, it's frequent that there's going to be a plane crash today. No, it's not. This is an infrequent accident, and when it happens, it is primarily tankers.
I don't know if I will remember all the points I want to make, but you know, on revenue sharing, the obstacle to revenue sharing getting through Congress is not conservation. It's the obstacle to revenue sharing in Congress is that senators and congressmen from the interior states don't want to share those dollars with those federal dollars with the states. Okay, so like Indiana, they don't want revenue sharing with South Carolina because revenue sharing for oil and gas, I think, is the second behind taxes, federal taxes. It is the second most. You know, it's the largest amount of money that the federal government gets. So they're not giving that up. Plus, you have fiscal conservatives in Congress that don't want to see all this money going to states. They want to balance the budget. So the obstacle to revenue sharing is very real. The Obama administration not only is opposed to revenue sharing, but they want to undo revenue sharing in the Gulf, right?
Well, Louisiana
Right.
got screwed on that for a very, very long time. We were the ones that didn't have revenue sharing. So we will agree on this, I promise you.
So, environmentalists are not the obstacle to revenue sharing. Revenue sharing is very unlikely to pass. It may, but it's very unlikely, and I think folks need to acknowledge that instead of just saying that we're going to get all these billions of dollars.
Look, I can't let you do that. I can't let you, because that's absolutely not true.
It is true.
I can't let you do
It's
it.
absolutely true, and I appreciate it if you'd give me my time because you went on for a long time.
I will let you give you your time, but I can't let you do that when you know that's not true. I am in the legislature. I see the lobbyists. You want me to name the lobbyists that are trying to stop revenue sharing?
I'm talking about Congress. I'm talking about the federal government.
I know them.
Okay?
I can name the lobbyists. You want me to name the lobbyists?
You are telling me that there are not representatives from the interior states who are opposed to revenue sharing? And they're not fiscal conservatives in Congress that don't want to see this money going to the
I'm
states?
telling you, I don't know one Republican in either the state legislature or in D.C., and I'm not saying they don't exist, but I don't know them, that opposes revenue sharing. The people I know that oppose revenue sharing
That's
are
what's right in
lobbying
South
for it.
Carolina.
Are lobbying for it every day
interrupt.
are environmentalists.
Let me interrupt and focus it a little bit differently. I think what we're hearing is that we don't know yet. And everything we're talking about is in the future. We barely started a process that may or may not lead to any of these actions that people feel so strongly about, whether it's sides or galvanized already. Certainly, it's possible. Anything is possible because we don't know yet. So we can debate if we want to whether this wing, this Republican Party, this Democratic Party, these interior legislators, these coastal legislators will win. But let's focus on what does South Carolina have to say in this. The decision-making question up front is still the overriding question. We have a balance that's necessary. Somebody's going to make a decision. Is it going to be something that we have something to say about or not? We don't know yet. We're involved in that process. Lawyers can have a lot to say about it. And I think, unfortunately, because we already see the fight, it's going to be a settlement agreement of some type the lawyers battle out for their clients that may actually be the final decision. Or it'll be a judge making that final decision. And so, are the laws in place? Okay, we're talking about new laws here. Are the laws in place that we need in order for the right thing, for this public to feel comfortable, the right thing is going to have to be decided? I think from a revenue sharing standpoint, no, it's not there yet. The pros and cons of what, if it might pass or not, that's a fight between lobbyists and interior states and legislators. It's not our fight at this moment. Let's look beyond that fight and see what does need to be in place in order for that balanced decision to be made. If you can continue in that vein.
Yeah. One law that I don't think is in place that, Skeet, that you mentioned is the blowout preventer rules. Those have been proposed. And it took, I think, the blowout preventer rule, I think a lot of people would agree, is the most important lesson learned from the BP disaster. Because that was the problem that led to the spill. And the proposed rules there took 5 years to propose the rules, and they haven't been finalized yet. And industry, there was an article in the Washington Post just the other day, industry is pushing back hard on those rules and trying to gut those rules. So I guess the point is that my understanding is that there has not been much if anything significant, to address through new laws what happened with BP. So,
I'm going to ask Pete to talk about the criminal aspect of the changes he's
Well,
seen.
yeah, and that's, look, if I thought that the law preventive rules had been put in place, they haven't, I made a mistake, okay? I'm not perfect, I don't know my facts, and in fact, when I signed up for this, I didn't realize it was going to be a big environmental aspect. I thought it was going to be the response, because that's what I do, is I'm called to go to companies the day that something like this happens and work with them, their employees, and the press, okay? So, you know, Fairmont might be right on that, but what you're wrong on is that Horizon did not happen. You can't say it happened solely because of a failed blowout preventer. That is false. You have exact, let me finish. You have exact testimony from people from Transocean, and I can talk bad about Transocean. I can't about BP because the representation that we're doing for them in the criminal matters. You have people from Transocean that gave testimony that feel terrible because their friends died because they made bad decisions that day. They could have shut things down at least 22 minutes earlier and this would never have happened. And that is a fact. I've sat in the depositions, I've heard them say it, they cry about what they did, and everyone on both sides, all the experts agree that the human errors, whether it's the Transocean employees or the BP people, who again, I can't really address what they did or alleged to do, although the last person that we went to trial with, the jury in New Orleans found not guilty. Go back to the criminal question then. That is important, and really important, because prior to all of this, you did have people working offshore, whether it's in Louisiana or anywhere in the Gulf. Let's say you're working 100 miles off the shore from Florida, and Florida doesn't like drilling. Well, guess what? The government has allowed someone to buy a lease 100 miles off of it, and they're just going to refine it somewhere else. They're going to take a pipeline and put it up in Mississippi or Alabama. That's how it's done, okay? But what happened before Horizon, the Coast Guard was understaffed. The criminal statutes had only been prosecuted. There was only one prosecution. It was in New Orleans, and it was egregious. It was a tugboat captain who basically left the first mate to die. Okay, it's terrible what he did. Now, what they will do is use the full power of the government to go out there, investigate. You know, if you've done any white-collar crime work, you know that the government has a almost 99% conviction and or plea rate because in the first interview, everyone is going to tell a lie. And you can ask any federal prosecutor about that. They're going to say a white lie, and once they do that, you're caught, okay? And so the fact that they have more people doing this and that there's actually something that's hanging over the individual's head, so they're taking a shortcut. Exxon Valdez, taking a shortcut, falling asleep. I worked a case where a captain working for a company called Chet Morrison Contractors, they were decommissioning a pipeline, and the captain did the worst thing possible. He actually told the employees to pump the discharge out of the pipeline into the interior of the vessel, which in and of itself is grossly negligent. But then he went one step further and said, put it in a dirty oil tank in the engine room, which caused an explosion. 2 people were burnt to, it was absolutely terrible what happened to the 2 of them. One guy was thrown off the deck. None of that happens if that captain is responsible and has the fear of going to jail for the rest of his life. And now he would. That captain, by the way, was so worried that he disappeared. You know, his lawyers were a little kind of sketchy to begin with because they destroyed the evidence from the get-go. But he hasn't been in the United States since that. And that happened on March 8th, 2008. Okay? So there is a lot of more law enforcement, and people know about it.
And that hopefully would be a deterrent for bad behavior and for people who make mistakes that are grossly negligent that could be prosecuted.
Well, people are being prosecuted right now in New Orleans, and it is a very big deal, and I know people in the industry, because it's not just going to be the captain, it's also going to be the executive. And that's who from BP they're going after, is the executives who happen to be out there that day, which is very uncommon.
Well, and it really follows a pattern. The federal government a couple of months ago did get a new policy statement on criminal activity, going after the top people they could. I've always called it the hacked approach from and we're not highest achievable corporate target. It's kind of where the Department of Justice goes, and we've seen a re-emphasis on that in the Department of Justice policy that just came out. But back to coastal issues, offshore oil and gas. We don't know what we don't know. We do know what we like. We do know what resources we enjoy in terms of the fisheries, the tourism, the natural preservation, the H Basin, and all the things that I think a lot of South Carolinians would say, yeah, those are inviolate. You can't really do anything to hurt those. But the tanker could do that today. And if we don't really have a stake in making the decision on leasing or not leasing, and if we don't get the support services in our state to control where the pipeline or where the ships come and go from, and it's in North Carolina or it's in Georgia instead, we only have the burdens and none of the benefits. Do we need to ask for those things to be here if it happens? Do we need to be prepared? Or are we going to just let our taxpayers fund whatever spill response is necessary and suffer whatever damages there are without any potential benefit whatsoever? How do we answer that logic 20 years from now if something bad happens? Chris?
I guess just, one thing I'd like to respond to is just this notion that we have no say. I mean, yes, it's a federal decision, but I don't agree that the fact that all these communities have issued resolutions, that we have state and federal legislators that have written letters and come out against it. I absolutely believe that that will go into the final analysis. And so I don't think it's right to say that these resolutions don't matter or we get no input. I mean, that's the whole part of NEPA is that we have public, why is Boehm having 20 public hearings in this region? They want to hear from people, and they have heard from people. And so that's why I think at the end of the day, we're not going to see South Carolina open up to oil and gas. But that
South Carolina is the other continental shelf in front of 4 states.
I'm talking about the waters off of South Carolina. Exactly. I don't believe they will be opened up ultimately, because I think that the politicians in D.C. and the bureaucrats will listen to what is overwhelming response to this proposal. I don't think anyone here could say it hasn't been.
Well, let me ask the question though. We don't know what we don't know. So where's the overwhelming facts to overturn an environmental decision under NEPA that leasing can occur? And so that's what we don't know yet. What studies do we need? What environmental information do we need for the lawyers to have a chance to say that's a bad decision because here is the balancing of those risks and the risk outweigh the benefits?
Well, but a key point is that they have just proposed opening up this area. There is no draft 5-year plan yet. So it's not like, it's a whittling down process. There hasn't been a decision to include federal waters off of South Carolina or any of these states yet. They're in a listening mood right now. So, there's no final resolution to this issue yet. That's why these comment periods are so important.
So there is no final resolution. He's correct about that. But there is a draft 5-year plan, and it does include South Carolina.
There's not a draft.
There is a draft of a 5-year plan. And there's a draft of a 5-year plan, and it includes South Carolina. And there's a lease that is proposed in 2021. And of course, they're actually looking at speeding it up in 2018 or 19 now. So, but I think the original question is a very good one. If we say no, if South Carolina does in fact have some kind of power over the federal government, which I think all of us who have studied the Constitution understands that's not correct. But if Georgetown, the mayor of Georgetown does somehow have the ability to tell the president that he's not going to accept oil and gas drilling off of South Carolina, then they're going to go to North Carolina, or they're going to go to Georgia, or they're going to go to Maryland, and they're going to have the drilling, and they're going to have the benefits, and they're going to have the jobs, and we're going to have the risks. Okay? It's going to happen. If there is oil and gas off of the East Coast, take my word, it's going to happen. Okay? Do we want the risks with no rewards? Is the question you've got to ask yourself. Now, what the environmentalists will want you to believe is, number one, We've already talked about economic benefits. There are no economic benefits. But the second thing they want you to believe is there's no oil and gas. That's the next thing that's coming. There's no oil and gas off South Carolina. Don't look here. There's nothing behind the curtain. Well, if there's no economic benefit and there's no oil and gas, of course we shouldn't do drill off of South Carolina. But does any of us in here believe that a multi-billion-dollar company in a multi-billion-dollar industry is going to go offshore and it's going to willy-nilly drill a bunch of holes and it's going to willy-nilly put, I don't know, thousands of employees out there with no potential benefit, with no potential upside? So how do we determine that? How do we, as legislators, if we can in fact have a say, how do we determine whether or not the reward is there? I keep going back to this risk-reward analysis that we have to do. I think the only thing that we can do at this point in time is move forward with what we haven't talked about really thoroughly yet, is seismic testing. We have to know what's out there. We have to know what's out there. And we have to do that in order so that we can make an informed decision, as Chris says. We have to be able to make an informed decision so that we can tell the federal government what our true wishes are. If you have come to a conclusion already that you are opposed to oil and gas or that you're for oil and gas, you're wrong. I'll just go ahead and tell you flat out, you're wrong. If you are for oil and gas drilling off of South Carolina right now, you're wrong. If you're against it, you're wrong. Because we don't know anything. We don't know if it's there. We don't know if it's there. You have to have the information in order to make an informed decision. And that's the first step.
Thank you. How about one more round before we go to the questions?
Yeah, there's a timing problem though, because the 5-year plan will be finalized before the end of the Obama administration, and seismic testing, the new seismic testing results won't be there. So we can't make an informed decision because the 5-year plan will be developed before there's any new seismic data. So there's that timing issue. That's part of the regulatory problem here that's just worth noting. Second of all, we're not saying that there's no economic benefits to be derived from a new industry locating here. The point I'm making is that under current law, there is no federal revenue sharing with the states on the lease sales. And that's $19 billion that's been promised that under current law it would be zero. Now there are going to be jobs, there's going to be other economic inputs. We're not saying it's going to be no economic input, but what we're saying is you've got to balance it against what we already have. And so much of our coastal economy is based on our beaches and our clean waterways and shrimp and fish, and all that is put in jeopardy by it.
First, you actually said balance.
Thank you, Jack. And then, because seismic testing has its limits, I mean, proponents of drilling talk about seismic testing like it gives you this perfect image of what is out there in the ocean in terms of resources, and that is just not true. In order to find out what's really there, you do seismic testing, and then you have to drill. You have to drill exploratory wells, and BP was an exploratory well. So, to really find out what's out there, you have to drill a hole in the ground. And that's what Shell just did in the Arctic. Shell did all the seismic. They went out and they drilled. They spent $7 billion, and they came up empty. That's because seismic gives you sort of a sense for where the geologic formations are that you can find oil and gas, but it doesn't tell you everything that's out there. In seismic, we could talk about this for a while too, but seismic in its own right is very damaging to coastal resources. And the Department of the Interior says that seismic testing will result in injuries or death to 130,000 marine mammals. Studies in Norway show that seismic has resulted in reduced catch rates for commercial fisheries of up to 80%. So, seismic has its own very significant impacts. And so, no, I mean, should we just go out there and find out what's out there? There are real downsides to doing that.
But we have to know, and we have to figure out the economics of energy security require that we can't, we haven't really even gotten into climate change, and we can't, unfortunately, because we have to go to question and answer at this point. But in order to make balanced decisions, we don't have the information. So, where's the balance in terms of even exploration? That's going to be decided by your appeal. It's going to be decided by other court actions that will be taken.
We're going to have to make the decision on whether or not to open federal waters off of South Carolina will be made without any new seismic data. Just the way
I think we take for granted the government's going to make those plans and open it up before they happen.
If
One
I
last
can-
word, Skeets, before you go to
Yeah,
the
let me just
audience.
touch on the seismic issue, because I spoke yesterday with Richie Miller, who is from Spectrum Geo in Houston. He testified before Congress last July. It's the third time he's testified. Congress and the federal government, despite a stat which has absolutely no support about what might happen to mammals in the sea, has funded seismic. Seismic is out of Norway. They do work all geospectrum seismic. They do work all over the world. Okay, this is not some little mom and pop shop. They know what they're doing, and you know, in a kind of a strange way to counter the argument about the mammals that might die. One of the reasons why you're going to do seismic, in addition to trying to find a fertile ground, is also to help protect the environment. Because you don't want to drill and interrupt the mammals or anyone's environment if there's nothing there. So it serves many purposes. Our government has long funded it. Everyone in this room is paying for it, whether you like it or not, okay? And so there's a lot of misleading statistics against seismic, and there's no proof, okay? Second, with respect to the federal revenue, you know, we can all discuss that, but it doesn't matter because they're going to do what they want to do. Okay. What you can do, what South Carolina can do, is two things. Number one, you can tax the hell out of them. That's what most states do. It's kind of like going to New Orleans and going to a hotel room. And you check in and they say, oh, we have this great rate for you. And then when you check out, you're like, why the hell did I pay $300 a night for a room that said $200? And you look at the bill and they've got all sorts of taxes, everything you can imagine. That's what happens. That's the reality of what states do. Okay? When the world's bad, like right now, then the state's budgets go down. When there's doing well, everyone profits off it. So that's one thing. The second thing, which is, this goes to Steve's point, and this is why everyone really needs to consider the reality of it, not just the fear that goes with the idea of change and your life's going to be different, okay? Because of an uncertain event which may or may not happen in the future, okay? And that is, Steve's right. They can go out right now and drill deep water, okay? They can. South Carolina has no say over what happens 50 to 100 miles out. Just no state does. And then what you have to say in that is where it's refined. And that, you can say, no, we're not going to do that. And then what they'll do is they'll take a pipeline and they'll send it to Virginia or Georgia or North Carolina or somewhere that's going to make money off of it. Because one state is going to do it. I mean, you think about it, California does this, and I think we can all agree there's no more liberal state in the union. If they do it, oh, well, maybe New York, but they allow fracking, then why would you guys turn down that opportunity to make that money? It's, to me, it doesn't make any sense for you to allow someone, as Jack said, to drill, because you don't have a choice, 50 miles offshore, but you don't refine it and you don't make money off of it.
I wish we had more time to continue this discussion, but we want to hear from the audience. I appreciate y'all's participation today, Steve and Chris and Skeets. Thank you very much. Let's give a round of applause for Graham and Charleston. Anybody out there have any questions or care about this issue?
Hey, Hamilton Davis, Coastal Conservation League. I was not recording you, Representative Goldfinch. I've memorized everything you have to say on this topic, so I didn't need to. I mean, you know, I've heard a lot about balancing in this topic. I mean, this panel is a little incredible in terms of the lack of balance. In Charleston, where we have a city resolution, a county resolution, in the state of South Carolina, where we have resolutions up and down the entire coast opposing this, and people are concerned about this, not because of myths about accidents, it's because people have paid attention to the disaster in the Gulf 5 years ago and the day-to-day problems that occur with this industry. So this idea that a spill is like a plane accident is nonsense. There are thousands of spills every year that are documented in the Gulf of Mexico. Talk about California. California is opposed to new drilling. And what California can't do is undo the decisions that were made in the 70s. And they're still suffering things like pipeline accidents that have shut down beaches as recently as this summer, and suffering the consequences of those decisions that were made decades ago. So the people of South Carolina are fully aware of what this industry means and how it conflicts with our quality of life, our natural resources, our current economy, and those are the concerns. And we absolutely have an opportunity and a say-so in what happens off of our coastal waters. So public process is underway. Public process means there's an opportunity for the people of South Carolina and our representatives to speak up, and that's exactly what they've been doing, and that's what they've been doing in other coastal states. And I hope folks in this room take some time to pay attention to people like Mark Sanford and State Senator Chip Campson, who have spoken very loudly, very eloquently on why this is a bad idea for the state, and have spelled out why South Carolina is not Louisiana, and we don't want to turn into Louisiana. So there's no question there, but a little bit of frustration sitting through the last hour and 15 minutes, given where this conversation actually is in South Carolina.
I'd like to respond to that.
Petroleum Institute person here would like to make a counter statement.
I would.
We have this not.
Yeah, I'm Bonnie Loomis, and I am with the Petroleum Institute, and I don't have a question, so I wasn't going to say anything. I was waiting on Hamilton's question, and it never came. Although Hamilton and I have had a lot of conversations with each other and enjoy asking each other questions and answering back. But I just wanted to say thank you for what I felt like was a little more balanced perspective that was presented today in light of what we've seen up and down the coast over the last few months. Thanks.
Someone over there. Back.
Yeah, Jack, I would like to respond to Hamilton's comment. Hamilton, I have the same concerns that you do. I absolutely do. I love this place that I live. As you know, I'm a big spear fisherman. I'm a big scuba diver. I'm a huge fisherman. I'm an outdoor enthusiast. I love this place. I use it more than just about anybody I know uses it. And the last thing I would want is for it to be ruined. But I think we have to engage in a risk-reward analysis here. I engage in that analysis every single day like you do. And I quite frankly, I just don't see the barren waste ground that you claim and your friends claim are going to happen. I go to Louisiana every year fishing, every single year. I spent years down there duck hunting in the bayous, Nash Fly Delta. I spent years down there, and I don't see it. I don't see it. And so you can't convince me that right now, you can't convince me that we shouldn't at least explore the idea that it could possibly be a good idea. Saying that it's a bad idea before having any information is not the right solution. And I would pose a question to you and the others out there that already have your mind made up in opposition. And the question is very simply, if there is profit sharing, would you support it? And I think I know the answer would be no. You're shaking your head no right now. So let me change the question. Do you support the idea of profit sharing? Not would you support drilling, but do you support profit sharing?
Absolutely, South Carolina should get part of this.
Thank you. That's all I want to know. Thank you.
Can I address the last question though, because it was directed towards my now? Okay? And here's where you're wrong, okay? If you want to say that there's spills that happen more often, yes, there are minor little spills, wait, let me finish and say you're using your little hands, that are reported, but nothing ever becomes of it, okay? I'm talking, and that, which is the equivalent of every day in this country, there's several small planes that crash at airports and the people die, and that's a shame, but they choose to fly their own planes. I'm talking about major spills. I'm talking about things, the horizon was a very, very, very rare event. That is what I was referring to the extent that some little small thing might be reported because they're required to, and they do, but doesn't affect the environment, no one gets hurt, yeah, that happens. But that is not a real large-scale incident, and no one really talks about those.
Hello, thank you all for coming and speaking with us. My name is James Kubu. I'm just a casual observer. Chris, I do have a question for you. South Carolina is unique in that we have something that some of the other states do not, and that's federally protected water off our shores as the habitat for the endangered northern right whale. How could that come into play, or maybe remove South Carolina from this discussion altogether?
Yeah, good question. So the question was about right whales, and actually, it's one of the most endangered marine mammals in the world. Right whales come to waters off of Georgia, South Carolina, North Carolina to calve their young every year. And actually, just within the last couple of weeks, NOAA has expanded the critical habitat for right whales. It used to stop. It was Florida, kind of, and then south of Savannah, and they've extended it all the way up to North Carolina. And so I think it's absolutely going to have an effect on this process, and I think it's actually one of the reasons why we were expecting to see draft seismic authorizations under the Marine Mammal Protection Act and the Endangered Species Act. They were supposed to come out last year, and they've been delayed, I think in part because of ongoing consultation regarding the expanded critical area for right whales.
Do you have a question?
Hi, I'm Steve Nelson, just a casual observer as well. Mostly I've heard three scenarios talked about here. There's a scenario where all goes well and we make billions of dollars and everything's great. There's a scenario where we have a spill and the coast is affected and that's awful. And there's a scenario where they find nothing and none of this matters. But what about the scenario where I have a geology background and I'm personally skeptical that there's anything off the coast in the first place. There's never been a successful Atlantic well off the coast of America in the history of our country. So what about the scenario where we find, a little bit of oil, but but it's not, the boom of Louisiana. It's more of a start-stop kind of economy where it's it's more finicky. Is that still? This is more directed to Stephen. Is that still a desirable outcome if there's if it's a very troublesome industry that we result in, or is that still net benefit?
So I think, is the question, if there's a little bit of oil, would I support the exploration of it? Is that the question?
More the, if the upside proves to be very minimal, in the grand scheme of things, if it's not the $1 billion industry that, yeah.
Oh, okay, yeah, so if the upside is very minimal, no, I wouldn't support exploration offshore, but I want to reiterate the point. It's not up to me. And I'd also like to make the point, which I think anybody who understands economics, including you, sir, would believe. I don't think that we're going to have oil and gas industry. Do you know how much an offshore, a deep water drill nowadays, a rig, one of those giant rigs for deep water costs, averages $2 billion. So do I believe that an oil and gas company is going to go spend $2 billion to collect $500,000 or $500 million for that matter in oil? We may all think that they're greedy. We may all think that they're evil. Are they stupid? No. We all know better than that. So would I support it? No, but it's sort of an irrelevant sort of an irrelevant thing, because I don't really think that the oil and gas companies would go out there to engage in a loss either. I mean, that's not something that I would do if I was an executive of Shell or anybody else.
Check that for a second. And you're right, and the Arctic shows that, because when Shell went to drill, they didn't find anything and they abandoned it. Okay, they're not going to, if they're not going to make money, they're not going to do it, because, and these are issues that we've spent an entire day talking about. And that is, aside from building it in the, you have to employ people, you also have these incredible contracts, and you have the insurance policies premiums are something that you have to see it to believe it. But what I do want to point out before we shut this down, because I think this goes unknown, and the best way for me to describe it, aside from the fact that every one of you in this room has used something of a petrochemical origin today, and probably have it right now, whether it's lipstick, deodorant. 5 years ago, after Horizon, that year Pearl Jam played at Jazz Fest. Okay, and I was out there, and Eddie Vedder got up and started saying, you know, all these things. The crowd booed him, of course, because a lot of them were in the industry. But what I found really funny was there was a plane circling that said, stop, with a banner, stop drilling. And I thought to myself, every single aspect of that plane is a product of petrochemicals. So we can act like this is bad. We can act like this is something we can do without, and let's go with wind, which is, I mean, we didn't talk about that, thank God, because that's just silly. The truth is, it's used everywhere. And look, we can giggle, but it's true. Every one of you have some byproduct right now on you from the petrochemical industry. That is an absolute fact. Plastics, fiberglass, you name it. So the bigger picture is not just energy. The bigger picture is, what else can you guys do in terms of money making with the oil? And you can do a lot, and we need it. Trust me. There will come a day where we're going to need more than 16%.
I don't know what else is on the agenda today, but hopefully someone to speak to the fact that wind energy is not silly. It's been far better, well received by communities in the state than. Yeah.
Last question.
I'm John Kern, I'm a lawyer here in Charleston. I guess the question I would like addressed is whether, how do these students who are here prepare to participate in this aspect of our economy? We're not trained like the two-lane bar in maritime LLMs. Is this in maritime jurisdiction? I know you've got energy and gas law, but how do these students take advantage of the coursework that's before them in order to be able to be voices, educated voices on this matter in the Charleston bar 5 years from now, 10 years from now? What's the best way to prepare for a career which touches on these issues?
Great question. I think there is an effort to get a maritime program that's started or is going to start at the Charleston School of Law, but I'd love the panelists to say what they think the most important legal training would be to bring to bear and what we know is going to be the coming fight.
I can start. I'm sure Skeets has got an opinion of that as well. You know, I spent a lot of time in California and in Louisiana investigating these matters. Certainly mineral rights law is interesting. I'm not sure how important mineral rights law is offshore in federal waters. Federal waters, as you know, are governed by different rules. So maritime law, admiralty law is definitely important. And we did have at Charleston School of Law, we did have a maritime LLM here. I don't know if it's still, can y'all answer, is it still running? No, it was discontinued?
It's not discontinued, we just have low enrollment.
Low enrollment, okay. All right, well, certainly your enrollment will increase in the very near future if this precipitates. And I think that would probably be a fantastic program for many of you to get involved with. Certainly, regardless of what side you're on, opposed or in favor, you can make hay in this industry. I mean, you can make a lot of hay in this industry on either side. Like I told a young lady last night, she said, I want to go into mass tort defense. I don't know if she's here or not. And I said, well, great, I do a lot of mass torts on the plaintiff side, and I'll be happy to talk with you about that anytime. And she said, well, I want to be on the defense side. I said, that doesn't matter, we're lawyers. We can make arguments on either side of an issue. We can see both sides of the issue. That's what's great about being trained as a lawyer. You can evaluate objectively both sides of the issue. And that's exactly what I would encourage you to do here. And I think admiralty law is a fantastic way to get a good grasp on this.
I'd take environmental law, learn all the federal statutes, state statutes, administrative law.
I would take constitutional law and federal procedural law. As you've probably learned, there are specific federal statutes that afford jurisdiction in maritime courts. Under Section 9H, it deprives the defendant of the right to a jury. It's based on English law from the 1800s, as well as the limitation of liability law, which is way too much to explain right now, which is also based on English law, and the Jones Act, which goes back to English law as well. The Jones Act, and this is the reason why people, they're aghast when they hear that someone settled a case for $1 million or $1.5 million, because then they had a back injury. What they don't realize is that the biggest component of the award was future wage loss. Because if you have a guy making $120K and he's 42, and he can never work offshore again, you can imagine what he's going to be. And that's not going to change. The Jones Act allows a negligence action against your employer as compared to a column. It's a 9-day difference. So that's what I would take.
All right, Matt. I'll add one more, legislative drafting. Right, we in the General Assembly, there's a shortage of people that are very good at drafting legislation. And I would encourage all of y'all, if you have a course in legislative drafting, I'd encourage you to certainly take that as well.
I want to thank the Riley Institute and the Charleston School of Law for the opportunity to help lead this discussion and for opening up this discussion the way you have today. Please let's give our panelists a round of applause.
We will begin shortly.
get going here. We're running a little behind schedule. I want to let everyone know that the coffee has brewed again as well. So I know you all love that. Well, that was a fantastic panel. I'd like to remind everyone that we don't specifically take any position on any of these issues, but we try to have a balanced board. Maybe we should wait another couple minutes to get everyone done. Okay. Our next panel will consist of a discussion of South Carolina Act 236. That's South Carolina's big solar energy initiative. And I'd like to start by welcoming our panelists. Are they all ready? Representative Harold Mitchell is the South Carolina House Representative for District 31. He has a long record of achievements in environmental justice, and he has been a big proponent of solar farm legislation in 2013. On my left here is Ashley Cooper, a partner at Parker Poe, the Charleston office. He focuses on regulatory and commercial law with a focus on energy law. Hamilton Davis is the Energy and Climate Director of the Coastal Conservation League and currently serves on the Energy Advisory Council for the Public Utility Review Committee. And our moderator today is Bland Holman, Managing Attorney, Southern Environmental Law Center, and look forward to it.
Thank you, Clint. Hello, everybody. I'm excited to be on the same stage that, with these gentlemen, but also I've seen many good acts here at this particular venue, including Aziz Ansari. Never seen him live. He's hysterically funny. And hopefully we will be as entertaining as he is, and this might not be as charged as the last panel, but we've got some great issues to talk about today. It's a new era for renewable energy in South Carolina, and it's been a real highlight of my professional career to work on this issue with some of the folks on this panel over the last couple of years. And we're going to focus on solar energy today. And I want to just, before we begin with the panel, just kind of give some basics, because it sounds like a simple topic, but it gets very complicated very quickly. And you all know the basics of solar energy. That is, the sun. The sun powers a panel that converts that energy into electrical energy. There are typically two kinds of solar systems, solar electrical generation systems. One is rooftop, and I think that's what most people think about, which is you put it on your house, or you would put it on a Walmart, let's say. It's at the facility itself. The second would be a standalone solar farm, utility scale type solar generation facility. I just think it's important, because these issues are going to come up later, to understand some of those distinctions. The second thing to understand in South Carolina is, well, let me ask you this. Is anybody here opposed to solar power? Is anybody for solar power? Great, so it's a great issue, and it makes you wonder, why isn't there solar power everywhere? We're going to get to that. Before we do, it's important to understand also in South Carolina, where does electricity come from, and legally, how are we set up in South Carolina? And the answer is, at least in Charleston in particular, we have a regulated monopoly situation where privately owned companies, in Charleston it's South Carolina Electric and Gas, are given a territory and are allowed to invest money, generate electricity, and make a return selling power to customers in that territory. In return for that, basically franchise, they are regulated by the Public Service Commission of South Carolina, which is, the General Assembly is charged them with reviewing the investments that are made by the utility to make sure they're prudent and they make sense for the consumers. And so that's the situation. In South Carolina, we have a couple of wrinkles. We have a very large state-owned utility called Santee Cooper that is not regulated by the Public Service Commission. And we have electric cooperatives that are member-owned and they distribute electricity, especially in the rural areas of South Carolina. I give you that layout just so you understand some of the players who are involved in energy in South Carolina. But let's rewind the tape a little bit and go back to 2013. And everybody likes solar power. We've got a lot of electrical demand in South Carolina. Why in 2013 wasn't there solar power everywhere in South Carolina? And what are some of the challenges that we were facing then? And I just want to get the panel in on this. So what was the landscape, Ashley, from either a utility perspective, from a consumer perspective, and what were the barriers?
Well, I'd even go back before 2013. I think you did a great job of setting the stage for this. And just to kind of elaborate a little bit further, think of our state as a pie, right? And so go back when you're first thinking about getting energy to your home. How did we do this? Because I think today when you hear about, well, SE&G has a monopoly in Charleston, what's our natural instinct? We want to go and carry banners and say, down with SE&G, and let's let Bernie Sanders know about SE&G, right? So let's go back in time a little further back where we were just getting power. And essentially our state was carved up, right? You have Columbia and Charleston were franchise monopolies of South Carolina Electric and Gas. And the idea being, as you stated, there's heavy investment. They've got to put in distribution wires. They've got to put in transmission wires. They've got to put in generation stations. And you just can't have a free market of a lot of competition putting in this much investment. So then you take the central northern part of our state around Florence, you had what was Progress Energy, and that had a franchise monopoly. Then you had Greenville in that area, and that was Duke Energy. Now Duke and Progress have merged. Then you had Santee Cooper and the co-ops, and they kind of filled in the more rural areas. So that was the design of our state. And that was the basis for what was distributed energy. We built large-scale, utility-scale, as you were saying, utility-scale generating plants, and you put it on wires, transmission wires that fed down to distribution wires, and you got it to your load base. And just a very quick, since we're going to be getting into this, I've done some training for different clients, and I'm surprised at how many times they say, even when I talk to utility companies, they say, well, I like this analogy. Let me just think about this for a second. When I talk about transmission wires, what do I mean? I mean the big wires you see, like sometimes when you're flying over in a plane, you see these large corridors, right? Think about something that connects South Carolina with North Carolina, Duke with Progress, with Southern Company, with Santee Cooper. I like to think of that as our highway system. You've got I-26, you've got I-95, I-77, I-85. You've got distribution lines, which are stepped down. That's kind of the roads to your house. John Street right here, your distribution. And then generation, like the cars going over the streets, okay? So prior to this act, in exchange for making this investment and putting in the resources of having transmission, distribution, and then the generation to come, these utilities were given exclusive rights to serve retail customers in their service areas. So that means our homes, industrial customers, businesses, Boeing, and we'll come back to Boeing. I want to talk about that in a second after you talk, Hamilton. That all is you are a franchise customer, and the utilities have the exclusive right to serve you power. And let me stop there, and I guess you have some more for Hamilton to now take you from that. That kind of sets the stage where Hamilton and these guys came into action.
Okay, yeah, I'll take it from here. My blood pressure is just coming down from the last panel, so if I talk fast at first, forgive me.
I told Hamilton he could wave his hands.
Well, Bland, you were talking about where were we 2013 or before passing Act 236, and what we were seeing to the north of us was North Carolina as the #3 solar state in the country, and then if we looked down below us, we saw Georgia, who was quickly climbing that ladder as well. So we had two states that had passed we created a policy and regulatory environment where solar was growing, and they were seeing economic benefits of that in the form of jobs and revenue, but also seeing clean energy coming online at a fairly rapid pace. In South Carolina, we just hadn't really taken the time to update our energy policies to reflect what was happening in the energy world, this 21st century version of how power is produced and consumed and where it comes from. Solar has grown dramatically. Most of that growth has taken place in the last 10 years. And like I said, it's just kind of coming into the Southeast in a real way. And I think what we did in South Carolina was just recognize that our neighbors were having success with this technology. There were people on the ground here that wanted access to it, whether it was churches or schools, homes or businesses. There were developers that wanted to do bigger projects like we were seeing in Georgia and North Carolina. And so we had an opportunity to sit down and look at where the barriers were and think about what types of incentives needed to be put in place to actually make solar a reality for our state. And I think that policy regulatory environment that we created for solar is the same thing that we have for nuclear. It's the same thing that we have for natural gas, in the sense that, as Ashley pointed out, this is a highly regulated industry. This is not a free market in the way we tend to think about our markets in this country. You have to have the right policies, you have to have the right regulations that support investment in and development of various energy technologies. And so that's what we've done now in South Carolina, and we'll get into the details of what that looks like as we move forward.
From a barrier standpoint with the legislature, I will have to give you my disclaimer up front. As you know, with our legislature itself, where we are in this state, the mention of this discussion prior to Act 236 was mostly tainted with the administration, the current administration, the discussion of Barack Obama, climate change, that overshadowed everything in our General Assembly because most of our members are spinally challenged. And when you look at talking about something that's tied to this administration, nothing's going to pass. So cost, utilities, the regulatory environment, all of that was overshadowed by the talk of being tied to something out of this administration. So that was the major hurdle that we had to overcome. And looking at some of our neighboring states and how things were working both in Florida and North Carolina, I believe is what was able to allow some of our members to get on board with this, because we were able to bring the chair of Ways and Means from Florida, Joe Gibbons, who actually was a major part of helping us with Act 236 and its impact there in Florida. So it was just a lot of what we had to get past the administration and looking for what was best for South Carolina.
If I could, just on the, I don't know if you want to jump into the politics side, but since Howard was raising that, I can come back.
Yeah, that was a great setup. We're going to get to the politics in just a sec, because I think that the political groundswell that happened was remarkable in 2013, 2014. But to put to put a point on, if you put a utility hat on, and you think about the notion of solar power, why you wouldn't necessarily be all thrilled about it would be, you're in the business of selling Big Macs at McDonald's. In some ways, somebody wants to come and set up a burrito stand on the sidewalk in front of your store. You spend $1 million to get the store running. You've got a license to operate, and this person might not even have, you might think they don't even have a license to operate their business there, and they're going to start peeling off some of your business. So there's actually a fairly straightforward revenue problem from a utilities perspective, that they're in the business of selling units of electricity. If you're now getting electricity from somewhere else, solar panel in your house, that could create a challenge for their business model. So there's an economic problem. There's also operational problems, and we'll talk about that some later too, of you don't just throw a solar panel on your house and just go off the grid. That's not how it works. Modern PV systems typically they're interconnected with the grid. So the power that you generate, if you're not using everything that is coming from the solar panels in your house, you're away at work during the day, let's say it's a sunny day, power goes back on the grid. Now whose issue is that? Well, the distribution lines in SE&G territory, SE&G maintains those lines, and they maintain the transformers. And so they have operational concerns. Who pays for it if there is any added cost to maintain the grid? These people are going solar. Who pays for that? And so there are a whole suite of issues that come up when you start thinking through, okay, what does this mean from a utility perspective? And I think in 2013, we saw, especially if you think about the cooperatives, who are nonprofits, they are owned by their customers, they're in the business of distributing power. If their costs go up because people are doing a lot of solar, they may have to, they think, pass those costs on to their customers. So you've got cooperatives, you've got utilities raising concerns, and some very scary stories being told about, well now, what if half of everybody goes on solar? Does that mean that the half who aren't on solar, now their bills get doubled? And South Carolina, raising electrical rates, the rate you pay for your electricity, is politically a very, very divisive and important issue. I mean, it is a major cost of living issue for people in South Carolina. So that, to me, was part of what was going on in 2013. The resistance to solar that led to a study that was done. I think, Hamilton, you were involved in that.
I was.
And who was involved in that study, and what was the point of the study, and what was the
Yes, so there had been legislation introduced in 2012 that would have advanced things like solar leasing, where third parties could come in and lease you a solar system that you could put on your rooftop, which was illegal in South Carolina prior to Act 236. And that really, I think, kicked off this bigger, more comprehensive conversation around, well, let's take a broader view of solar and our policies and see what needs to change. And let's do that with conservation groups and solar businesses and utilities and co-ops around the same table and see if we could come to a consensus position. And part of that was this Energy Advisory Council process where we spent essentially a summer studying the current state of affairs of solar across the country and where are the challenges associated with the things that Bland's talking about, revenue, losses from the utilities. Will solar cause people's rates to go up? And what we essentially figured out was at this stage of the game, in the growth of this market, you're not going to see negative impacts on other customers. It's kind of just an opportunity game right now. Certainly at some point in the future, as we move into higher penetrations of solar on our system, the expectation is we'll see an evolution of how utilities offer rates to their customers. So the value of energy efficiency, the value of distributed resources like solar, and what the rate structure looks like and the interplay between the customer and the utility, that's expected to change. But what our study told us and what our analysis told us is there's a lot of room to grow, and before we get into a situation where we have to tackle that tough question of rate evolution, we can do the things that have already proven to be effective across the country. Allow solar leasing, have a net metering program where if you push power back onto the grid, you're credited at retail rates. Allow utilities to create their own customer programs and incentivize additional investment in solar. And that's what came out of the study, and then we had to get to work actually drafting legislation that reflected some of those ideas, and that was tougher than the study, I'll say that.
So politically, we kind of, I think, understand some of the economic issues and challenges. Those were surfaced and looked at in this report. Politically, where were we? And how did this bill come to happen? And why would it, for example, why would investor-owned utilities agree to a bill like this?
Well, I mean, I think, so one thing we saw in the legislature was that there was bipartisan support for solar legislation, and specifically the leasing legislation that had been proposed. You had, I think, 13 or 14 Republicans in the Senate that had signed those co-sponsors to this. And part of that was just motivated by the fact that North Carolina was doing it, their rates weren't going up, they were creating jobs, and they were providing access to this clean energy. Georgia was getting in the game and seeing a lot of success, and there was no reason that South Carolina shouldn't follow suit, especially considering the level of support from various stakeholders, churches, citizens, businesses. And so, given that there was this legislative interest in the state, the utilities recognized that rather than be on the table, they wanted to be at the table, and there was an opportunity to negotiate something that worked for everyone, and that's where we ended up.
Do you want to talk about that, the utility perspective?
Well, I mean, well, just a slight, not necessarily a utility perspective, but a slightly different perspective. I agree with everything that Hamilton said. I think it's a very fair characterization. I guess I was just going to add, in addition, I think other important elements in our state. I saw one of the topics we discussed was, in a conservative state, how did we pass something like this? And how did the legislature pass something like this? And going back to what Representative Mitchell said, given his comments, which I think were spot on, you have a General Assembly that's going to be naturally leery of something like this. How does it happen here? And I think in addition to the things that Hamilton mentioned, I think you also got to look at, I think you had a CEO of Duke who at the time was very pro-renewables. And this was a controversial position to be CEO of one of the largest, then once they merged with Progress, the largest utility in the country to be pro-renewables. So I think that was an important part of this. I think when you go and you talk to people from BMW, Michelin, Boeing, and the more international, large multinational businesses we have in the state, the more they say, and I don't mean to offend anybody's politics here, they say, look guys, we're multinational products. We are not going to be brought down by your state politics. We have a brand and we have an image to uphold. And so they were, you go talk to BMW, they were saying, we have a reputation as being an engineer leader. So whether the state does this or not, we have to be looking at alternative ways to power our plants to reflect that we can build the most sophisticated cars. And then I think you got to look at the CEO of SCANA. I think Kevin Marsh was willing to come to the table. Hamilton, I heard a lot of good things. I think you and Keller Kassam, the president of SC&G, hit it off. And so, I think there were a lot of things at play behind the scenes that all made this come together that I would just add to.
What was the perspective in the legislature while this was happening? There was not, just for everyone, it was said earlier, there was not a single vote cast against this bill in any committee in either chamber. And I was involved in the process, and I remember thinking, when all that happened, I think everybody who was involved was like, wait a minute, what are we doing? If everybody in South Carolina can agree on something like that, something's wrong. but I think it was a big compromise. I'm curious how it felt in the legislature when you were there.
Well, in all honesty, the picture I painted before was one realistic about anything, as I'm going to say it time and time again. When you look at this administration, there's a fear factor. But I think and I don't think the credit has really gone to folks like Hamilton and Ashley for what was done behind the scenes. It was mostly trying to keep the temperament down while the work was being worked on the outside, and then being able to, once everyone was educated and understood the benefits of how it could impact South Carolina like it was done in North Carolina and Florida, there was the buy-in. And anytime you do that kind of work behind the scenes and bring it to the legislature, you'll get a better result of the buy-in, and that's what you saw moving forward with the passing of that legislation. But prior to that, all the negative statements and things that were put out there, these guys, they would basically run like scalded dogs without having the real information, because everyone's afraid of the next election.
I think that what y'all hit on all the things that I experienced when I was going through it. The fact South Carolina is a small state, and sometimes that can be, lights went off, really to our advantage. I think there were a lot of people, a small group was involved, and they developed trust, and Has anyone here heard of the utility death spiral? Some of the people in the industry have heard of it. So in other states where they've seen much more solar penetration, people who watch utility kind of dynamics have said, no, wait a minute, if solar goes too far into a utility's territory, it creates what's a death spiral. And the notion is that if my neighbor has solar and she is able to reduce her electrical bill, and now if I'm paying more, if that is somehow transferred costs on me, guess what I'm going to do? I'm going to go solar. Guess what my neighbor's going to do? And it's just this reinforcing deal that happens, and it leads to like an existential threat to a utility. And my sense in the beginning was these fights were playing out elsewhere in the country where you had very sophisticated solar companies who were ramping up very quickly. And they basically are utilities. And they are in a fight with the incumbent utilities about who's going to provide power. And it became kind of a, it's either going to be us or you. And if you die, that's fine because we'll win the business. And part of the trust, I think, that happened here was, and that led to the compromise, and I want to get to that in a sec, is at some point, there was the utilities, I think Duke and SCG came to understand that the point of this bill was not to kill them. It was not to take everything away from them, but was to feather it in and actually point a way forward for them to continue and to allow solar, to allow consumer choice, but also to allow them to make money in the solar field.
Well, just to add a little more background to that, and I know we talk about it in terms of rates. I just want to make sure it's clear to everybody when we talk about this notion of utilities going into a death spiral or being concerned about everybody going solar. I mean, it is a complicated issue, and this is not something that we, by any means, as Hamilton was alluding to, we're just starting to get it. This is going to be an issue that becomes more and more of an issue over the next decade and the decade after that. I mean, there are going to be some very complicated discussions to try to figure out how to deal with this. It's not simply a matter of the utilities don't want you to have cheap power and they're trying to keep it from you. Kind of like, remember that you all are probably too young for this, but I just barely remember it. But, the telephone days. I mean, AT&T didn't want you to have a cell phone because you had to go to AT&T to get a phone where you push the button. Well, it's not really that, okay? The idea is, we have become so accustomed as a society to having reliable power. Think about our hospitals, our homes, our businesses. I mean, I'm a lawyer in town. If our law firm is without power, we lost power for, about half a day a couple months ago. I mean, it was like a holiday. I mean, everybody was paralyzed. It's like we didn't know how to practice law anymore. Everybody knew how to read, nobody could talk on their phone, I mean, everybody's just walking around with their heads on their... So, the idea is, from a utilities perspective, it is, look, it doesn't matter whether we have 90%, if we lose 10% to solar in Charleston, or we lose 50%, just a hypothetical. Guess what? For that 20% that you need us when it's in August, or it's in January, or there's a storm, or it's cloudy, it's still going to cost us X amount of dollars to have steel in the ground, to have wires that run, and as long as we rely on distributed energy as a model to back up our power, that's where you have an issue. And that's what we're talking about in terms of rates. And as Hamilton alluded to, this rate shifting, what happens is I lower my power bills, but I still need the power company to kind of be there, right? I mean, I'm still going to want it if something happens to my solar. Well, but you're paying more for your rates because I've reduced my bill. How do we work those things out? And that's the issue that they're alluding to. So I just want to make sure that we all fully understood that, so it didn't seem like, this isn't just a matter of
market share.
I didn't want them to sound like big tobacco, if you will, and finding out that cigarettes cause cancer right now.
Right. It's an operational issue, and it comes under the rubric of duty to serve. We heard that a lot, and there's actually part of the regulatory compact in South Carolina. If you're granted a monopoly, like SEG, or you're serving customers, you actually have a duty to keep the power on. So now that there's a conflict perhaps between your duty to serve the end point customer and all this distributed energy that's coming on.
Yeah, can I just add one thing to what Ashley said too? I mean, so this equation that we're looking at is what is the value of the grid, and then what is the value of distributed resources that are complementing the operation of the grid, something like solar. And that's what we don't have a really good answer to. Or that's what we're working through nationally, that's what we're working through. You've got like this 50-state experiment that we're running right now as to how to balance those two things and how to come up with that, that value, what that value proposition means when you unpack it. And so if you look at a resource like energy efficiency, our utilities encourage energy efficiency because it is a cheaper way to meet future energy demand. So they incentivize you to do that. If you're an SCG customer, there are a dozen different ways that you can save money, and they'll help you save money by reducing your consumption. So it's not just that buying less power from an investor in a utility creates a problem for your neighbors. It's what's the value of how you're reducing your use. And solar falls into that category too. It's just not as, we're just not as familiar with putting a dollar sign on that value of solar as we are with energy efficiency, which we've gotten comfortable with, and we push through legislation and through regulation and through utility programs.
That's a good transition, I think, to, all right, so what the bill do? If any of you would like to tackle it, it had three components. It was kind of a grand compromise and kind of interlocking three components. One was to allow SCG and Duke to opt into this program where they could now have solar programs to incentivize their customers and others to go solar and to pay for that. And to pay for that by recovering money from all of their customers to incentivize this program. The second component was that we were going to have a reboot of the net metering. And I'll have panelists tell you exactly what that means to get a refined net metering going forward policy. And the third was to open the door to solar leasing. If those other two things happen, then we would have the door open to solar leasing. Just to make sure you understand why solar leasing is so important. You know, a solar system for your house might cost $20,000. You might not. I don't have $20,000 cash in the checking account, so that's a barrier. Now a company shows up and says, guess what? You don't have to pay $20,000 up front. In fact, I'm just going to make it cash flow positive for you going forward. Your power bill goes down, end of story. And they are able to take advantage of tax credits and financing in a way so that they make money, your bill goes down. You don't put up money up front. Now, that's a turbocharged solar adoption recipe right there, and that is very much what was of concern, I think, to the utilities in this state. Is, you know, leasing was unlawful. If we're going to let that happen, that's got to be part of this bigger workout. I don't know if y'all want to talk about what is the DER exactly? What is SCG doing? What is Duke doing? How have they done? I mean, they're now underway.
Yeah, so that was, as you pointed out, that was one of the three things the legislation accomplished. And what we've seen over the last few months is SCG and Duke roll out customer programs for their commercial customers, for the residential customers, and then also programs that make it reasonable for developers to come in and build large-scale solar. And so SCG and Duke have taken a little bit different approaches. And so, again, we'll see what works best in the marketplace in South Carolina. But SCG, since we're in Charleston, I'll talk about that. They essentially pay you more when you put electricity back on the grid than even the retail rate today. So they're incentivizing a quicker payback time when you invest in solar. That's for residential and commercial. They are also working right now on community solar programs. So this is more like a virtual ownership model where instead of actually putting solar on your home, you can buy into a larger solar farm and then see savings on your bill from the credits and the power that's produced at that larger array. So there's a number of different ways that you can take advantage of what SCG is offering. And then you combine that with things like solar leasing as a different financing model, or state tax incentives, federal tax incentives, and at the end of the day, you have a really attractive investment opportunity in the rooftop solar market. And we're about to have an attractive opportunity with something like community solar as well.
Can one of y'all tell us what net metering is?
Well, net metering is essentially just the idea that you've got, when you're taking power to your home, the thing outside that spins, that meters how much power you're using. So if you're generating power and you're generating more power than you're consuming, you've got another meter that's going to measure how much power you're putting back to the utility. And so there's a formula for how much you have to exceed it by. But once you hit a certain amount of hours over your consumption, and then, so there's a credit that the utility is going to pay you for producing power for them. And month by month, they're just going to roll it into your next bill. But at the end of I think it's the end of a 12-month period, they will actually cut you a check if it's over a certain amount of dollars. So that's the incentive to have people sign up for this. Now, it's capped, so we can't just, once a certain amount of people sign up, that incentivized rate disappears. But it's a fixed rate, I think, for 20 years, 10 years for that.
And so net metering is typically going to be on rooftop type systems. It's not, that doesn't really apply to utility scale.
Right.
I understand that large solar arrays typically generate electricity cheaper than a rooftop array. Views on why, if that's true, why do we want to incentivize rooftop?
Well, let me, before I go there, I think you raised a good point, and let me maybe clarify some of these things, because I didn't think about it until you really brought it out. But yeah, so when we're talking about net metering and rooftop solar, we're talking about residential and non-residential businesses. So this is your home, this is the business down the street, the restaurant down the street, and the ability to install solar panels to provide an alternative generating source for themselves. Now, as part of this bill, they allowed for something called solar leasing, as you've heard. And this is something that doesn't seem like a big deal on its face, okay? But solar leasing, in my opinion, is a huge concession that the utilities were willing to give up when you put it in the context that they have the exclusive right to supply you power, okay? So that means nobody else can come in and say, look, I've got this little generating machine and I can put it up to your house and sell you power. You can't do that. When Boeing came here and wanted to put solar panels on their rooftop, they couldn't lease them. They had to buy them so that it was Boeing's personal equipment. And then they could do that to offset their power bill. And you might say, well, why is it really that big a deal? Because you're leasing equipment. Somebody else isn't providing you power. And not to get too much in a law school type exam here, and certainly not to confuse myself with this, but think about your lease with the company providing you the solar panels for your rooftop, right? Doesn't seem like they're providing you power, does it? It's just a lease. How many people say it's just a lease? It doesn't all seem like they're providing you power. It's just a lease of equipment. Show of hands. I mean, obviously, I'm going to try to trick you on this, why I did that. But thank you for participating. I knew you knew I was setting you up, but thanks, Catherine, for still going on with it. All right, but think about now you read the warranty section. And what happens when the warranty says, we warrant that our panels will produce 10 watts of power per day for 30 days? Now, my warranty tells me an amount of power that you're providing to me. Does that still sound clear-cut, like it's a lease of equipment, or does it sound a little bit more like someone is providing me power when they come in and put a warranty in that says, this is how much I'm telling you my equipment is providing to you? I think it sounds, all right, I'll raise my hand. I think there's a real challenge that had you not had this in law, you would not have had a program like this before, because I think the utilities would have had a great argument that if you came in and leased panels and you provided a warranty on the output of those panels, that you in fact were providing power. You are not just leasing a piece of equipment. So I think that's a major concession. On the community solar, let me just give a little bit, that's a slightly different program, and this is how it would work. With community solar, you don't have to put the solar panels on your rooftop, but there could be a development And let's say you got a 10-acre development, and on a 12-acre piece of property, the developer may take 1 acre and save that and put a bunch of solar panels on that 1 acre. And then the homeowner will contract with the developer to buy one of those panels, and they will meter the output from that panel, and SE&G or Duke or whomever will meter that to know the production, and they'll figure out how, whether you use more of their power or you produce more power, but they'll meter that for you, and that'll reduce your bill, or you can get paid back for that. Again, pretty major concession given you got somebody else producing that power.
Yeah, and I'm curious, I mean, so there's all these different flavors of solar. There's this utility scale solar, there's community solar, there's rooftop, on-site solar. And Representative Mitchell, I'm curious from your perspective, politically, what do you understand when they say, hey, look, I want solar, you know, I'm pro-solar. I'm guessing there may be they have an environmental perspective on it. Do they also have, I want it on my house because I want to be independent, or is it, I don't care where it comes from, I just want solar? Just how have you viewed the political support for solar?
The political support for solar, when you look at our constituent base, their biggest thing is how can I lower my utility bill? And that was part of the major pushback, was not so much solar, but this whole thing was about the utilities. The fight against SE&G, SCANA, Duke, that was the big push in the fight. And I think once that was moved off the table, people began to see that this is something that, you know, basically everyone embraced once they were able to be educated on how this would work. I mean, it's not rocket science, but once, you know, pushing back all the things that were basically put out there, we're able to basically just get people to understand the benefit, the cost benefit. And I think even when you see after the bill itself, since Act 236, the only problem that we've seen is that from a demand side, that's been the biggest push I think you can see right now, is just the demand. It's really out there now for the solar installation, but going back to the General Assembly, it's still a factor of residential. Residential is still a piece that I think the General Assembly is still having some pushback on, and not wanting to incentivize residents. Is more non-residential is the flavor rather than residential solar at this point, or renewables.
And is the pushback on residential because of this? Why do you think that's residential is rooftop? So why is there a political pushback on rooftop versus big solar farms? Is it because of the concern about impact on the rates, or
the impact on the rates?
So because it may be more an expensive way to get solar, we want to prefer a different way to do it? Or I sense sometimes going through it that there was a political, there's a political issue with the people that can afford to get solar, put it on their house. And the people who can't afford to get solar, pay the bill. And solar leasing is seen as a way to maybe minimize some of those challenges, because affording to put it on your house means, first off, you've got a house. Secondly, you may need the cash to put it up front, put it on your house. Solar leasing allows you to not have to put the cash up front, and so it makes it more available to people of all incomes and backgrounds. The bill does contain some carve-outs that require the distributed energy programs that Duke and SE&G are doing to focus on not just doing rooftop and not just doing commercial. Are y'all familiar with the kind of carve-outs and what kind of programs they're doing, for nonprofits or anything else?
Yeah, I mean, it breaks down to the utilities have a 2% target. So 2% of their peak energy load needs to be installed as solar by 2021. That's the time frame for that. 1% of that needs to be rooftop. Within that 1%, 25% needs to be residential scale. At least 25% needs to be residential scale. The other 1% is utility scale, so larger than 1 megawatt is your standalone big facilities that they're not necessarily serving an individual customer, but are being put on the grid to serve all customers. And there are also requirements related to tax-exempt entities like schools and churches and municipalities that can't take advantage of tax incentives that are out there, and so the utilities have to create an alternative option for those entities to access this technology. And then there's also a requirement that low-income, moderate-income customers have some access to these programs, and that's where the community solar comes in. And if you look at the actual the incentives being offered at the commercial level, residential level, to a church, to a municipality, they all vary, but they're all based on trying to encourage investment given a certain payback period and what SCEG is predicting the market is going to respond to. And as Representative Mitchell said, what we've seen so far in this very short period of time, these programs were just rolled out, I think last October. You're already seeing the market respond in a really aggressive way. Those targets, we're closer to those targets than we thought we'd be 6 months down the road. And I would predict that the 2021 expectations are probably going to be met closer to like 2018, and we'll be revisiting this conversation with the legislature, and probably in the context of some other policy discussions like EPA Clean Power Plan, State Energy Plan. This stuff will come back up, and we'll see these opportunities expanded sooner rather than later.
Does anyone want to take a crack at explaining the Clean Power Plan in 3 sentences?
All 50 states are required to cut carbon emissions from existing power plants, but we have the opportunity to come up with our own state plan as to how we do that, and we get to use renewables, energy efficiency, new natural gas, and nuclear to accomplish it. And so we're in the process of developing a state plan that gets us to where we need to be between now and 2030, and that plan will be finalized in 2018.
And I will say,
there might have been a semicolon here.
Excuse me, Glenn, I will say that one of the good things that we're being looked at outside of South Carolina is the fact that when you look at the Clean Power Plan and looking at an energy plan for the state, it's actually stated when you look at some of our manufacturers that are leading DHEC for, and I'll say this for what it's worth, but when you look at how they've been viewed in the past, this is one area where they are looked at outside of South Carolina as being the leader in the country, especially for the public commenting period, because even there's an environmental justice task force that's out there right now meeting, coming up with their recommendations in a work group that's pretty engaged throughout this state, where other states are kind of sitting back waiting. Our state has been pretty aggressive in this public commenting and getting those comments to be a part of the state's energy plan.
And this is actually a direct consequence, I think, of the work that went into Act 236. You've got a lot of the same players at the table. We figured out this kind of consensus-based model for talking about controversial issues and coming up with a path forward that works for the different stakeholders. And certainly DHEC and Maurice over there they've been leading this and getting, as Representative Mitchell said, a lot of regional and national attention, because South Carolina's got a process in place that's exemplary, and it tags on to what we did with Act 236.
Right, and certainly the leadership also from former Director Templeton, and I believe the current Director, Captain Heigel, is here as well, has been, I've participated in the stakeholder process, and I've got colleagues who work in North Carolina where there's been an ideological position taken against the Clean Power Plan, and in South Carolina it's more of a pragmatic position of, listen, it may or may not happen, but if it happens, we need to start planning now, and let's look at our options for reducing carbon emissions from the power sector. And as I may have failed to mention in the beginning, solar power doesn't generate any carbon. Electricity from solar is carbon free. In South Carolina, we have our electrical generation has traditionally been from other sources like coal, which is very carbon intensive. So the rule is a lot about reducing coal-generated electricity, bringing on natural gas, other forms of lower and zero-cost carbon, and Act 236 helps get us there. Representative Mitchell, you have an even newer bill that was passed into law, I believe, yesterday? And was hoping that's also, hopefully we're making progress in South Carolina on clean energy. If you could give some background on the bill and tell us what it does and how you came to be involved in that, I think we'd enjoy hearing that.
Okay. Well, the bill itself, after looking at this appetite now for solar, was looking at something where we can embrace renewable energy and incentivize some of the developers for wind, solar, biomass. But it was because of Act 236 that the appetite was for solar. So it was to provide a $2.5 million tax credit for a 25% cost of the installation of solar. And this was one that was because of a project in Spartanburg that we were looking to convert a former landfill that was owned and operated by the city of Spartanburg to convert that into a solar farm. So Duke Energy, Grow Solar, and the city of Spartanburg have been working together, and we were looking at kind of, trying to help to incentivize this from a state perspective like the federal. And so this was embraced and pushed through at the end of last session, but died because of our abortion debate. It was taken up quickly when we came back in, and it was actually the last bill that Senator Pinckney worked on and was able to help perfect with Hugh Levin to get it out. And I thought we would have gotten that out last June. And unfortunately, the week that one of our other colleagues, Senator Pinckney, was there at the funeral, I was kind of giving him a hard time about allowing the abortion debate to kill my bill. And he promised that this would get through at the beginning of the session, because this was something that everyone was embracing. So it did pass yesterday, and we'll be able to move forward. We were looking at something that would not have a big fiscal impact, and many were worried once again about, are you going to incentivize residential? And so basically it's looking at the 29 NPL sites that we have in the state. So all of the sites that you can't do anything else with.
These are Superfund national priority list sites.
National priority listing sites, as well as Superfund equivalent sites that this could be used for. So we're looking forward to getting this to where we have more of a success story of using solar in some of these other sites that otherwise could not compete with some of the pristine projects, because you can't penetrate the caps on a landfill. So this tax credit is basically making an equal playing field for those compromised properties.
So so I understand mechanically, do they have to kind of build like a superstructure over the site to put the panels on, or?
No, sir. Instead of, where you can't penetrate the landfill, sticking the panels on, what they do is they would use the ballots that would sit on top of the cap of the landfill that would not infect the integrity of the cap. So this would sit on there, the grids would sit on top of those concrete ballots that wouldn't impact the cap of the landfill, because most of those are being monitored for at least the 15, 20 years that you monitor most of those landfills with the cap. So that ballot basically protects the integrity of the cap.
Great. Well, maybe we'll transition to talk about what folks see coming up in the next 2, 3, 5 years on renewable energy. And then we'd like to open the floor to questions, and I hope you're all thinking about your questions. If you haven't, think of some so we can have a lively discussion. So coming up, what are we looking at? Are we seeing solar going to stall out? Is it going to accelerate?
Well, I don't think solar is going to stall out. I mean, if you look at the last 5 years, the cost of solar's decreased 80%. So, 5 or 6 years ago, we would have all been sitting on the stage talking about wind and wind's the future, and solar would have been in second place. The technology and advances and cost reduction in solar make it real. Just full disclosure, while I represent some of the utilities, I also represent some of the national developers and manufacturers of large-scale, utility-scale solar. And so, you know, you can see that they really can make it now without the tax credit. So it's here. One thing, if I might, though, just to make one point of when we were talking about the challenges with solar and kind of connect one set of dots for the utilities. We've been talking all about Act 236, which is state regulated, and it is about putting solar on our rooftops. And as Hamilton said, there is a commitment by the utilities to incorporate 1% of solar, utility scale solar, as part of their overall portfolio, right? Their generation at a utility scale. So just as they're building nuclear plants or a gas-fired plant, they're going to build solar or renewable plants or have someone do it for them and turn it over to them as part of their own portfolio. But there's another part of this that makes it tricky for the utilities, which is federal law, which is called PURPA. And what PURPA was designed in the early 70s was an energy efficiency, that, you know, where you had manufacturers building on-site generation and the idea of selling it to the grid so that you could be more efficient, build less power plants. Then it kind of morphed into a pro-renewable bill. And what PURPA says is that if you have a renewable source, so wind, solar, methane gas from landfills, wood chips, other things, and there's certain rules for this, you can become what's called a qualifying facility, QF, and it exempts the developer from most federal regulations, and it requires, and then if you develop it, you can develop a utility scale project, so up to 80 megawatts, and you can sell it to the utility, and the utility has to purchase it for the utility's avoided cost, meaning a cost at which the utility would have had to essentially pay itself for generating those megawatts. Okay? But the difference is there's very little that a utility, certainly in the Southeast, can do to say, thanks, but we've got enough, or hey, we've got Act 236, and we've got residential solar, we've got community solar, we're building our own, we appreciate it. They can't do anything about it. So when a developer comes in and says, hey, I'm building a plant and I'm locating it in this county, as a utility, your hands are tied. I mean, you can run a study and you can tell them how much it's going to cost them to interconnect to your grid, and they have to pay those costs, but you are taking that power. Now, whether you had planned on that power or your 10-year goal looked at that, and when you started a community solar program or building a new nuclear plant, you're taking that power under federal law. So that is a wrinkle we haven't talked about.
Yeah, well, just to elaborate on that a little bit more, I mean, what Ashley's describing is one of the reasons North Carolina has had the success with solar that they have over the last few years. But it's not just that federal, it's not just PURPA, it's also kind of the terms and conditions that the state decides on. So contract term, there's a standing offer contract term in North Carolina that's 15 years, which gives the solar developer the opportunity to actually finance these projects. In South Carolina, we don't have that. So we're definitely not right now in a position where a developer can just come in and do a project because federal law says you can put that energy on the grid. There's state levers that complicate that process that people are talking about and we're working through, and we may see that one day. But there's nuance there at the state level that
I mean, you've got federal. It's a complicated rubric where federal law says this is our policy, this is our mandate, and we're going to back off to each state and allow each state to decide how they're going to implement it. So, you know, if you look at a place like North Carolina, you're right, and you do have a more of a structure. You also have a state renewable portfolio standard. I do a lot of work out in Nevada. Nevada had a huge explosion and interesting, when you were, to your point, it takes me a while to kind of circle back to these things, but always get back to something you said and you can transition back off. That is renewable here to stay. Nevada was one of the fastest growing states for renewable energy. And a lot of it they thought was going to be geothermal in the northern part of the state. And then it became solar. And another reason why North Carolina experienced such a boom in renewables was because it had a state renewable portfolio standard. You had a political will
That's a
there.
target that utilities have to hit, right?
Yeah, but its proximity to California. Because you could build and you have a highway right into California to sell into this huge market that had a huge appetite. And so, and this is getting into a whole nother set of rules and regulations, and this is where federal law takes over. Instead of what we've been talking about is a retail program governed by state law and state rates, which is the idea of market-based sales, where I'm going in and I'm not selling to a customer. I'm actually going on the wholesale market. I'm buying transmission from a utility in Nevada, and I'm buying a leg of transmission in California. I'm producing solar, and I'm selling it to a utility itself. And in that situation, I can sell at what are called market-based rates. So that's kind of, think about it in terms of the overall market, not a state-regulated rate. But that's a whole nother thing we're seeing. And you know, you're seeing that a little bit coming in this way, where you get into Dominion has joined PJM. So Dominion's the power provider in Virginia, parts of North Carolina. So you do have some solar developers that are commercial grade solar developers that are thinking, no, I'm not going to just sell my output to the local utility, or I'm not going to try to install rooftop solar, but rather I'm going to try to build a plant, get transmission, get market-based rates, and sell it into PJM, which is you know, the Maryland, New Jersey, Pennsylvania, that whole market up there, which is an organized market, which is another topic for another CLE.
Right, right. So going forward, there's solar production costs are going down. There's more people in the market. Market players are going to be looking to produce it. You've got a federal process that kind of you know, encourages utilities to offtake some of this power. Same time, you've got the Clean Power Plan that's going to require reductions in carbon emissions. Does that mean we're going to see more solar? Or does that mean we're going to see more natural gas? Because what do you do when solar goes down at night?
Yeah, so I think we're definitely going to see more solar. We're looking at wind, both offshore and onshore wind. I think we'll see some of that, probably onshore first, offshore later. Energy efficiency is going to be playing an increasingly important role. The South has historically low electricity rates. That's not so true anymore. And more importantly, our electricity bills in South Carolina are some of the highest in the nation. So energy efficiency can play a big role in reducing costs for customers and reducing future demand. And then you've got Clean Power Plan. You've got a state energy planning process that's underway. It's statutorily required, and it's kind of a new thing in South Carolina that we're doing, but it's heavily focused on efficiency and renewables. So I think that, you know, Act 236 was the first step, is an opportunity for us to learn and expand what solar is in the state. But there are other policy options, there are other regulatory hurdles that have to be removed. And you look at the trends around the country, and you look at the cost of these technologies declining, and you look at the demand, and you look at the interest in addressing things like greenhouse gases, and it seems pretty clear that we're just going to move and continue to move into this clean energy future where these technologies are more commonplace. And this is a big deal in South Carolina today because we just did it and we're not familiar with it. It's not so much of a big deal in lots of other parts of the country. And I think 10 years from now, South Carolina's not going to be talking about, we're not going to be getting familiar with these technologies anymore. We're going to be familiar with them, and we're just going to be continuing to focus on balancing the portfolio where you do still have traditional resources like natural gas and like nuclear, but you also have a much higher level of penetration and representation from technologies like solar.
And there is a political will that is moving forward with this, because I think with the coalition of players that you see now, and geothermal was part of that legislation that was in there yesterday that passed, and we'll take back up, I think, wind, because everything that we had to take out because of the fiscal impact, I think there's a will now to put wind and biomass and some of the others that we originally had in that original renewable energy bill. But I think the will is getting there now, especially with coming up with our energy plan for the state and the Clean Power Plan, and part of the discussions that's going on around the state right now. I think that's going to we're not going to be last anymore. I think South Carolina is going to finally take the helm and move forward.
I think in terms of future things, and to build on what Hamilton was saying about, this continuing discussion, it's going to continue to evolve. I think it'll be interesting to see where it goes. There's no doubt. I mean, this is here. It's going to continue. I think what could be interesting is when they talk about things like smart grid, smart appliances. The idea that solar could, particularly in South Carolina, you look at your peak curves. So in South Carolina in the summer, our peak demand is around 3 o'clock in the afternoon. If you think about it, it makes sense to be the hottest part of the day. Well, guess what? That's when solar is going to be there. So you've got a clean, renewable resource that's hitting at about our peak time of the day. So this could, it's a very interesting thing for our state. But then think about when you go into, say, October or March or April, where you have these shoulder months where you don't have the peak, but you still have solar peaking, say, around 3 o'clock. Well, if you have appliances, they're smart appliances, that you can set your washing machine so that you go off to work and it's talking to the grid and it knows, well, I know that it was hit to start at 7:30 a.m., okay, but now at 3 p.m., I'm going to run because this is the most efficient time of the day I can run. And, I mean, that's where it starts getting pretty interesting. But where you think, can this really happen? Well, I mean, if Amazon can have a Tide tab and I can order Tide off of Amazon, I think we can get there with some of the smart appliances and things like that too.
Great. Well, I think we've got some time for questions. I hope people have them. We've already got one gentleman in the back. Our lady in the front.
Sorry.
That's all right.
One question that I had actually as y'all were talking, and I don't know if this is possible, but for the utilities, the solar leasing obviously presents an issue for the utilities on some level, and it was a concession that was made. Could the utilities get involved in creating solar panels down the line and then leasing them, or would that create a big obstacle that's been addressed already?
That's addressed in the law and what it allows them to do. So like SCANA could do this because they're the unregulated portion of SC&G could do this, but there are restrictions on whether or not an investor-owned utility could use their rate base as a competitive advantage to enter into that market. So they can do it, but there's red tape that makes it less straightforward than just jumping in.
That's a great question. And that's a fascinating point of debate that specifically came up in the negotiations about this bill. Because large solar leasing companies were concerned that SC&G, who's got a great relationship in terms of information access, they know where everybody lives and they know how much power they're using. If they start offering leases to their customers, they might have a competitive advantage over Solar City. And so that was the resolution of that question, I'll say, is there's policy issues on each side of that, but it was a political resolution.
Yeah, I mean, that was one of the things that we came down to the wire on that was actually holding up the final version of this bill that had to be submitted out. So, yeah.
Hello, thank you all again. My name is James Kubu. I am currently an independent solar energy consultant. And the question and a lot of barriers that we are running into and seeing is with homeowners associations. So I was wondering if the panel could quickly address the legal issues for the homeowners and the legal issues for the homeowners associations in denying people access to solar. Thank you.
Representative Mitchell's going to take care of that for us in South Carolina. No, that's an issue that we hadn't seen because we haven't seen a lot of solar in South Carolina, but it is popping up everywhere. And I get probably 2 or 3 calls a week from people that can't put solar in their home but want to, and their HOA is saying no dice. So how that's resolved, other states have passed things like solar bills of rights that prevent HOAs or local communities from being overly restrictive about investment and placement of solar. That's the most straightforward way to take care of it, and we'll see whether or not the General Assembly has the political will to do that. Otherwise, it just has to be addressed either on a case-by-case basis or potentially through a municipality, through a county.
Ms. Bonnie, can I speak to that?
Sure.
Thanks. I'm Bonnie Loomis and
You can talk about offshore drilling again, bye.
No, I didn't talk about offshore drilling. I just said thank you. I actually, before I moved over to what Hamilton and others might consider the dark side, a month ago, worked with the South Carolina Solar Business Alliance over the last 2 years in partnership with many up here on solar legislation. And for the record, the American Petroleum Institute does support all of the above energy strategy for our country. However, I would encourage you to take a look, if you're not a member of the South Carolina Solar Business Alliance, take a look at their website, partner up with that organization. That is a subject that is on their agenda for pursuing not this legislative session necessarily, but more likely next session. I believe the thinking is to potentially introduce the solar access bill later this year to begin the conversation around some actual language. And that if we connect later, I can give you the email address for the person who's now lobbying for that organization so you can stay in touch with them. Thank you.
Yeah, just to take that conversation one step further as it relates to HOAs. Specifically here in Charleston, we're here today, it's a beautiful city. How do you guys think that that same conversation could be applied as far as the Board of Architectural Review is concerned? And maybe limitations as far as implementing solar in this town because of the BAR?
Are you suggesting that the BAR would be difficult to deal with in solar?
Yes, I am. I mean, no one ever wants to talk about that, but it's...
I'll give you my standard answer when somebody asks me a practical question and says you're a lawyer. I like to remind them that I don't do anything that could be useful to the average person or is useful in any way. So I don't talk about things that are common questions or things that would be interesting or even useful. I have no good stories at cocktail parties, by the way, either. So I really, I get so immersed in things like interconnection agreements and power purchase agreements that I think it's an interesting point. I think as Hamilton said, I can't imagine the BAR being difficult. But I will give you my one brief thing that I did I'm not going to answer your question because quite frankly I've never thought about it that much. I don't have a meaningful response for you, but I'll give you my one badge of victory 2 years ago in a non-energy regulatory context I'm very proud of. There was, I say that somewhat jokingly, prior to 2 years ago, Rack Room Shoes did not have their name displayed on their awning on King Street. And I like to say I brought justice to King Street, and I got Rack Room Shoes their awning letters. So that's my one bout with the BAR. I'm 1-0, and that's where I'm stopping. But,
I didn't realize actually was such a social justice warrior. I think it's more difficult with BAR in dealing with downtown and historic buildings. That just further complicates it. But again, I think that there are states that have addressed, I know that there are states that have addressed these things at the legislative level, and that would be my preference in South Carolina is to do it there.
I mean, in thinking about this too, I bet, just given what Glenn's been kind of hinting at, I think in the next 5 or 10 years, with the way you're seeing the growth in the technology, this could be something that really starts to solve itself as demand comes up. You see more residential leasing, you have more problems with homeownership, BARs. I think the technology is going to be there soon where you're going to have something that's, these panels are getting smaller and smaller and they're more efficient. And so chances are, even if this is something we're still debating for a little bit, technology conceivably could help with this because it could be so small or be able to work into the architecture of the building as technology advances.
And another point that if you're a rooftop installer you probably don't want to hear is community solar is kind of, from a utility standpoint would be the option of, there are a lot of houses that don't have the right exposure for solar, or the HOA gets in the way, or variety of reasons people may not, they're leasing their house, but they want to go solar. The other option is to go, get a share of a larger solar facility that's being operated by SCG.
something like that.
Yeah, I mean, that's a great point. I mean, community, that's where community solar becomes so important, because community solar doesn't have to be in close proximity to your home. So, I mean, there could be a solar development in Orangeburg, conceivably, and you could buy into it to offset the power at your house. So that's another possibility.
But people want it on their, but, you know, there's this visceral, some folks, they want it on their house, they want to know they're doing their part, or whatever it is. There's, you know, their part of that's their independence, they want to have it on their house. So I think those tensions are going to continue, and, you know, like you say, it's going to bubble up, and you know, maybe it'll be solved at the state level, we'll see. I have heard from a historic preservationist that there has never been an application to the BAR to put panels on. I don't know if that's true. And I've heard from a historic preservationist that the historic preservation groups might not be opposed to it, it might be supportive. So who knows? I think it all depends on the facts of the situation and probably whose neighbors can see it.
John Anderson. My concern with solar panels has to do with the end of life of the solar panel and people disposing of them. I wonder if any, because of the toxicity inside the actual solar panels themselves, I wonder if any legislation, regulatory action has been thought of and or moved on in regards to the disposal of these panels.
Well, they've got 25-year warranties on them, and I guess we'll be better prepared to answer that question in a couple decades. I don't know. I'm not familiar with the disposal laws. I know it's regulated, and you know where you can put them, what you need to do with them, but I'm not familiar with it. There's some solar developers in the room that may know what to do with these things if they have to pull them down. John?
My name is Matthew Williamson. I'd like to thank you gentlemen for being here today. I just have a question. As a proponent and former worker for Santee Cooper in the coal power energy industry in South Carolina, where do you see coal powered energy in its place in South Carolina in the next 15 to 20 years?
I think, so I'll answer that by saying the last coal-fired power plant proposed in South Carolina was by Santee Cooper, and that was the plants that were dropped about 5 years ago. Every older unscrubbed coal plant in the state has either been retired or is scheduled for retirement, and I doubt we will ever see a new coal plant proposed in the state. So I think it's on the way out. Certainly there are newer plants online that we'll continue to get power from, but coal's going to continue to be play a smaller and smaller role moving forward. We'll see more nuclear, more natural gas, more renewables.
But on the projections in South Carolina, I mean, the looking forward 20 years and even the Clean Power Plan compliance for South Carolina, it's not a zero coal requirement. It's more of a, you've got to meet a certain rate of emissions of CO2 per megawatt hour you produce, or a cap. And so it's kind of up to the state how each state can meet their target. And in South Carolina, at least, it's very likely that the baseload units, like for example at Cross, are going to continue to play a role. There's just the grid, in terms of the stability of the grid, I think that the grid operators would say we're going to have that be there either as intermediate or baseload power for a certain period of time, but you're going to see other sources come online to start taking off some of that load. And for example, you'll see baseload power is power that's on all the time. A lot of coal plants were built as baseload units, but now with the increasing cost of operation from having environmental controls, the utilities might dispatch those units more as an intermediate. They come on when you really need peak power, and they're off, you know, during the low load period. So I think you'll see not just no new coal, you'll see less generation from coal as other sources come on.
Well, and a lot of that too is going to be, I agree, and part of it is a major investment in nuclear. I mean, I know you have another panel that's going to talk about that, but you know, Hamilton was saying nuclear is a part of this and part of the clean air emissions strategy, and so you've got a major, you know, $9 billion investment between Santee Cooper and SCE&G and 2 new nuclear plants. So I mean, right there, that's going to drive out a lot of the coal that you see.
Act 236 exempted Santee Cooper from it, and therefore the cooperatives from taking any action to promote solar power. I guess I'd like to know what the political rationale is currently to keep that exemption. Why shouldn't Santee Cooper, which is owned by the state of South Carolina, be folded into these state objectives? I mean, it passed unanimously, but the public utility, which we own, was exempted from it. And I think it seems like it ought to be enrolled in a similar type of a process. If we really believe in it, then it ought to be included in it. And secondly, on Santee Cooper, this past winter we saw, well, last month we saw the Century Aluminum plant reach a striking accord which involved political intervention, where Santee Cooper was willing to scuttle 600 jobs, each of which paid $100,000 a year at the Century Aluminum plant. Without intervention from the legislature, they would have gone away. All those jobs would have gone away. But the legislature did step in and say, Century Aluminum should be allowed to purchase 100% of its power from Duke, essentially, which was natural gas generated power. They were buying 75% of their power from Duke, but now it's 100%. So we talked about the death spiral a moment ago. This amounts to something like 10% of their entire generating capacity. Not 2%, but 10%. And is that a break in the logjam, which would allow other industries and even consumers to say, listen, if Century Aluminum can buy power for half the price from a competitor of Santee Cooper's, why can't I? Why do I have the privilege of paying more than double for power from Santee Cooper when others in the state are able to be exempted from that exclusivity requirement, and they get to pay much, much less for their power and for a cleaner power source?
What's that one?
I mean, briefly, why are they excluded from Act 236? I think it was political, and I think they should be included under it. And you know, at some point in the future, they'll be, I think, keeping up with what's happening in the rest of the state. On the Century Aluminum front, I mean, that spurred a conversation about deregulation, and I think the legislature is probably going to be studying that and looking at whether or not the regulated utility model that we currently have in South Carolina is the one that we should keep indefinitely. Southeast is one of the last regulated marketplaces where you don't have more competition in the wholesale markets, and maybe that'll change eventually, but I don't see it changing, next year.
I mean, from the perspective of a deregulated market, I mean, there's a wholesale deregulation, and then there's retail deregulation, as you probably know. So, when you look at the only thing at the federal level that's more highly regulated than the regulated wholesale market is the deregulated wholesale market. And when you talk about enormous legal fees, when you talk about enormous fines, it's in the deregulated markets. And, there's just such a, there's so much duplication. And I think that there's probably pretty good evidence. I mean, there's still a movement, and there are going to be more utilities that are looking in the West to join CAISO, the California ISO, which is a deregulated wholesale market. Some of the state regulators are very skeptical about it, whether it's going to be effective and efficient and better for the retail ratepayers. So it's not to say that there's no longer a movement, but when you look at the benefits that was supposed to bring to PJM or MISO or some of these other areas, I think it's very speculative or questionable that increased competition has actually reduced rates, reduced cost of service, or provided reliability.
And as I stated earlier, the spinally challenged members that I told you about earlier, this was a step process, and 236 was just the first step. And I think you'll see now that the will now to embrace solar and renewable energy, you'll see that more partners and people that were not at the table before, and things that were taken out of this bill just to get it passed. Because there was a lot that had to be done just to get everybody on board. So I think everybody's getting a little more comfortable to where we can bring those conversations and put them back on the table and put what should be in the bill back in.
I think we're out of time. Thank you to everyone. Thank you to our panelists for being here. Thank you for your time.